What would you do if you discovered the medical device that supposedly saved your husband's life? Didn't actually exist, Elena. Cross thought she was just organizing insurance papers when she found an invoice for a CardioMax Pro defibrillator worth $47,000. The problem. According to the FDA database, this device had never been approved for human use. Elena wasn't just any wife, she was a CPA with 12 years of forensic accounting experience. And her discovery would expose how her husband Jonathan had murdered 112 patients across multiple continents while planning to rob her and disappear. This is the audit that became an international criminal takedown. The grandfather clock in our Beacon Hill foyer chimed 11:47 as I spread the year-end medical insurance documents across our mahogany dining table. December in Boston meant two things: early darkness and tax preparation season. As a CPA, I'd learned to embrace both with equal measures of coffee and methodical precision. The house felt different with Jonathan away at another medical conference, this time in San Diego. Something about revolutionary cardiac intervention protocols. Our 1847 federal-style townhouse, with its original hardwood floors and crown molding, seemed to echo more when he wasn't here, filling the spaces with his confident voice and constant phone calls. I reached for the stack of invoices from Massachusetts General Hospital, where Jonathan had been treated after his sudden heart attack in August. The memory still made my chest tight, rushing to the emergency room, watching my husband of 7 years lying pale and unconscious, while doctors worked frantically to stabilize him. The CardioMax Pro defibrillator they'd implanted had saved his life, according to Dr. Richardson. At 42, Jonathan was too young for a massive coronary event, but stress from building cross-medical devices had finally caught up with him. Or so we'd believed. My fingers paused on an invoice dated August 15th, 2024. CardioMax Pro defibrillator, model CMP4847X, $47,000. The amount wasn't shocking. Medical devices cost fortunes, but something about the model number nagged at me. After 12 years auditing healthcare companies at PricewaterhouseCoopers, I developed an instinct for details that didn't quite align. I opened my laptop and navigated to the FDA's medical device database, typing CardioMax Pro CMP4847X into the search field. The page loaded slowly, then displayed results that made my stomach drop. No matching devices found. I tried variations: CardioMax CMP48T7, cross-medical CardioMax. Nothing. According to the FDA's comprehensive database, the device that had supposedly saved my husband's life didn't exist. My hands trembled as I cross-referenced the invoice with our insurance claims. The device appeared on 3 separate billing statements, each time with the same non-existent model number. Our insurance had paid out the full amount, $47,000, for a medical device that, according to federal records, had never been approved for use in humans. The rational part of my mind searched for explanations. Maybe the model number was wrong. Maybe it was a typo. Maybe the FDA database wasn't updated. But 13 years of forensic accounting had taught me that when numbers don't add up, there's usually a reason, and that reason is rarely innocent. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Dr. Richardson's contact information. It was nearly midnight, but this couldn't wait. The call went straight to voicemail, which was odd since he'd always been available for questions about Jonathan's condition. Dr. Richardson, this is Elena Cross. I have some questions about my husband's defibrillator device. Could you please call me back as soon as possible? Thank you. As I hung up, a new thought struck me. I grabbed the invoice again and studied the billing details more carefully. The device had been billed to Cross Medical Devices' corporate account, not our personal insurance. Jonathan's own company had paid for his life-saving surgery, except now I wasn't sure if any life had actually been saved. I walked to the window overlooking Beacon Street, watching the occasional late-night traffic navigate the narrow historic roads. The brownstones across the street stood silent and dark, their residents sleeping peacefully while my world quietly unraveled around a single medical invoice. If Jonathan had lied about nearly dying, what else had he lied about? The grandfather clock chimed midnight, marking the beginning of what would become the most devastating audit of my career. I just didn't know yet that I'd be auditing my own marriage. I met Jonathan Cross 5 years after graduating summa cum laude from Bentley University with a master's in forensic accounting. By then, I'd already made senior associate at PricewaterhouseCoopers, specializing in healthcare fraud detection, a lucrative niche in Boston's medical device-rich economy. At 27, I was the youngest CPA in the firm's history to lead a major pharmaceutical audit, and my success rate in uncovering financial irregularities had earned me speaking engagements at conferences across the Northeast. Jonathan had been a speaker at the same MedTech Innovation Summit, where I'd presented findings on a $50 million embezzlement scheme I'd unraveled at a competing medical device company. He'd approached me after my presentation, praising my brilliant forensic instincts, and asking if I'd be interested in consulting for his revolutionary startup. Cross Medical Devices, he'd explained over dinner at Mistral, was developing next-generation cardiac monitoring equipment that would transform how doctors detected and treated heart disease. He was an MIT-educated biomedical engineer with patents pending on 3 breakthrough technologies. His vision was compelling, his passion infectious, and his charm absolutely devastating. "Elena," he'd said, reaching across the table to take my hand, "I've never met someone who could see through numbers the way you see through people's deceptions. I could use someone like you in my life." It was perhaps the most romantic proposition I'd ever received, wrapped in professional admiration and delivered with the kind of confidence that had probably served him well in investor presentations. We'd married 18 months later in a ceremony at the Boston Public Library, surrounded by Harvard Medical School professors, biotech entrepreneurs, and the financial elite of Beacon Hill. Jonathan's mother, Catherine Cross, had insisted on paying for everything, a gesture I'd found generous at the time, but would later understand as control disguised as kindness. Catherine was Boston royalty in the truest sense. Old money, older connections, and the kind of social influence that opened doors throughout New England's medical establishment. The Cross family had been philanthropic pillars of Massachusetts General Hospital for 3 generations, with a wing of the cardiac center bearing their name. When Catherine introduced me as Jonathan's brilliant wife, the forensic accountant, I'd felt welcomed into a legacy of service and success. Our life together had been everything I'd dreamed of during those exhausting years building my career. The Beacon Hill townhouse was a wedding gift from Catherine, a $2.8 million federal-style masterpiece with original brickworking fireplaces and a view of Boston Common. Jonathan drove a Tesla Model S. He preferred my Audi A4, and we spent summers at the family compound in Nantucket, where Jonathan would disappear for hours on his sailing yacht while I read forensic accounting journals on the beach. I'd left PwC 3 years into our marriage, seduced by Jonathan's vision of building Cross Medical together. "You could be CFO," he'd suggested. "Imagine applying your skills to save lives instead of just catching criminals." The idea had been intoxicating, using my expertise to build something meaningful, rather than just tearing down what others had corrupted. Except Jonathan had never actually offered me a formal position. When I'd pressed for details about joining the company, he'd deflected with talk about letting the startup find its footing first, and avoiding the appearance of nepotism with investors. Instead, I'd transitioned to freelance consulting, working with smaller healthcare companies while supporting Jonathan's entrepreneurial dreams. The financial arrangement had seemed logical at the time. Jonathan's company was growing rapidly, but not yet profitable, typical for medical device startups navigating FDA approval processes. I contributed my consulting income to our household expenses while Cross Medical reinvested everything into research and development. Jonathan assured me that once the company went public or found a major acquisition partner, we'd both benefit enormously from his equity position. I believed him because I'd wanted to believe him. Because the man who'd swept me off my feet at a medical conference seemed incapable of the kind of deception I'd spent my career exposing in other people's companies. Because when someone tells you they love you while describing their vision for saving lives, you don't typically run background checks on their FDA filings. But sitting in our beautiful dining room at midnight, staring at an invoice for a medical device that didn't exist, I realized that my forensic instincts had been clouded by emotions I'd never learned to audit. Love, it turned out, was the one area where my professional skepticism had completely failed me. Jonathan traveled constantly for work, investor meetings in Silicon Valley, medical conferences in Chicago, FDA consultations in Washington. He'd return with stories of breakthrough presentations and promising partnerships, always one meeting away from the next major milestone. The company's offices in Cambridge buzzed with activity whenever I visited, filled with earnest engineers and researchers who spoke Jonathan's vision with the fervor of true believers. Everyone believed in Jonathan Cross. His MIT credentials were impeccable, his patent applications impressive, his presence at medical conferences increasingly prominent. He'd been featured in Boston Business Journal as one of 40 under 40 innovators to watch. Mass General's cardiac unit used cross-medical devices in their research trials. The Massachusetts Life Sciences Center had awarded the company a $2 million innovation grant. All of it had seemed so legitimate, so documented, so verified by institutions I trusted. How could a man lie about having a heart attack when he was supposedly developing devices to prevent them? How could someone fake medical records from Mass General where his family's name was literally engraved in the marble lobby? The questions multiplied as I sat surrounded by financial documents that had started to feel like evidence in a case I wasn't sure I wanted to solve. But 13 years of professional training had created habits I couldn't turn off even when the subject of investigation was my own husband. I gathered the medical invoices into a neat stack and placed them beside my laptop. Tomorrow, I would start asking the kinds of questions that had made my career. Tonight, I would try to sleep in a house that no longer felt like home next to the ghost of a marriage I was beginning to suspect had never really existed. The only sound was the grandfather clock marking time in our front hallway, counting down the hours until Jonathan returned from San Diego and I confronted him with the invoice that had changed everything. I woke at 5:47 a.m. with the precise clarity that comes from a sleepless night spent wrestling with impossible questions. Jonathan's flight from San Diego wasn't due until evening, giving me roughly 12 hours to either confirm my worst suspicions or discover a reasonable explanation for the medical device discrepancy. Coffee first, then the systematic dismantling of my husband's credibility. The morning light streaming through our kitchen windows felt different somehow, sharper, more clinical. I'd conducted dozens of forensic audits over the years, but never in my own home. Never while wearing my favorite flannel pajamas, never with this particular mixture of professional excitement and personal dread. I opened my laptop at the breakfast bar and created a new encrypted folder titled Cross Medical Analysis, the same naming convention I'd used for client investigations. Old habits die hard, especially when they're the only things keeping you grounded while your world shifts beneath your feet. First step. Verify the FDA database search from last night. In daylight with coffee and a clear head, maybe I'd find something I'd missed. I navigated to the FDA's 510K database and searched every variation of CardioMax I could think of. Cross-medical devices appeared in the results, but only for 3 approved devices. The HeartSync monitor approved 2019, the Cardio Assist Analyzer approved 2021, and the VitalLink remote monitoring system approved 2022. No defibrillators, no CardioMax Pro, no device matching the model number from Jonathan's supposed life-saving surgery. I cross-referenced the serial number from the invoice with the FDA's unique device identification database. The search returned serial number not found in approved device registry. My forensic training kicked into overdrive. If you want to understand a lie, follow the money. If you want to understand the scope of a lie, follow all the money. I logged into our joint checking account and downloaded 7 years of bank statements every transaction since our wedding. The spreadsheet that emerged painted a picture I had never bothered to examine closely. Jonathan's business expenses told a story that didn't match his descriptions of company activities. $47,000 payment to Med Device Solutions LLC on August 16th, one day after the supposed defibrillator surgery. But the invoice showed payment from Cross Medical's corporate account, not our personal funds. Why would a personal medical expense flow through business accounting? I searched corporate databases for Med Device Solutions LLC. The company had been incorporated in Delaware just 3 weeks before Jonathan's heart attack, with a registered address that traced to a mail forwarding service. Its sole listed purpose: medical device consulting and equipment brokerage. A shell company, created specifically to receive payment for Jonathan's fake medical procedure. My hands were shaking as I dug deeper into our banking records. The financial trail revealed a pattern that made my professional instincts scream warnings I'd been too emotionally invested to hear. June 2024, $23,000 payment to Boston Cardiac Specialists for consultation services. Dr. Richardson's practice, except the payment came from Cross Medical's account, not our health insurance. July 2024, $15,000 payment to Advanced Diagnostic Solutions for cardiac stress testing equipment. Another Delaware shell company with a mail forwarding address. August 2024. The $47,000 defibrillator payment plus $8,000 to Mass General Cardiac Research Fund, which, according to the hospital's public financial records, didn't exist. September 2024, $12,000 to CardioMax Technologies for device maintenance and monitoring, a company that shared a name with the non-existent defibrillator model. Over 4 months, Jonathan had systematically funneled $105,000 through fabricated medical expenses, all paid from Cross Medical's corporate accounts, but designed to create the paper trail of a serious cardiac event requiring expensive intervention. But why fake a heart attack? What possible benefit could justify such an elaborate medical fraud? I thought about the timing. Jonathan's supposed cardiac event had occurred just days before Cross Medical's scheduled FDA review for their next-generation monitoring device. A review that had been mysteriously postponed after Jonathan's medical emergency. The postponement had seemed natural at the time a company founder's health crisis warranting regulatory consideration. But now it looked like a strategic delay disguised as a medical necessity. I pulled up Cross Medical's FDA correspondence files, which Jonathan had always kept on our shared household computer for backup security. His transparency about work documents had seemed like trust. Now it felt like overconfidence. The email trail revealed the truth with devastating clarity. June 15, 2024, FDA notification that Cross Medical's CardioMax Pro device had failed preliminary safety testing with significant concerns about device reliability under stress conditions. June 20th, 2024, internal Cross Medical email from Chief Engineer David Kim. Current design has 40% failure rate in simulated emergency scenarios. Recommend substantial redesign before proceeding with human trials. June 25th, 2024. Jonathan's response. FDA review timeline is non-negotiable. Find a way to address concerns without major design changes. July 8, 2024. FDA follow-up stating that without resolution of safety issues, Cross Medical's application for CardioMax Pro approval will be denied with potential investigation into premature marketing of unapproved devices. July 15, 2024. Jonathan's email to his business partner, Michael Torres. We need 6 months minimum to fix the engineering problems. FDA denial would kill the company and trigger investor fraud investigations. I have an idea for buying time. The final piece of evidence was a Google search history from Jonathan's laptop accessed through our shared iCloud account. On July 20th, 2024, 3 weeks before his heart attack, he'd researched faking cardiac symptoms, medical device implantation surgery, insurance fraud penalties, and how long FDA postpones reviews for medical emergencies. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen that had just transformed my husband from heart attack survivor into criminal mastermind. Jonathan hadn't suffered a life-threatening cardiac event. He'd orchestrated an elaborate fraud to delay FDA scrutiny of a dangerous medical device while buying time to fix engineering problems that could have killed real patients. The scope of the deception was breathtaking. Not only had he lied to me about nearly dying, he'd created a fake medical crisis to manipulate federal regulators while potentially putting patients at risk with defective devices. My phone rang, interrupting my horrified fascination with the evidence. Dr. Richardson's name appeared on the screen. Elena, I got your voicemail. Is everything all right? His voice carried the professional concern of a cardiologist, but now I heard something else underneath the careful tone of someone who knew they were walking through a minefield. Dr. Richardson, I have some questions about Jonathan's defibrillator. The model number on our insurance documents doesn't match any FDA-approved devices. Can you help me understand why? The pause was long enough to confirm my worst suspicions. Elena, I think you should discuss this with Jonathan when he returns. Medical device documentation can be complex. Dr. Richardson, I'm a forensic accountant who specializes in healthcare fraud. I understand complex documentation. What I don't understand is how you implanted a device that doesn't exist to treat a heart attack that may not have happened. Another pause. Then quietly, Elena, please be careful. Some situations are more complicated than they appear. He hung up before I could respond, leaving me staring at my phone with the growing realization that Jonathan's fraud extended beyond shell companies and fake invoices. It involved medical professionals, fabricated procedures, and quite possibly the creation of an entirely fictional medical emergency. I looked around our beautiful kitchen, the sub-zero refrigerator, the marble countertops, the view of Boston Common, through windows that had witnessed nearly 2 centuries of history. Everything Jonathan and I had built together was funded by a company that sold defective medical devices while using elaborate fraud to avoid regulatory oversight. Worse, I'd been living in ignorance while real patients might have been harmed by devices Jonathan knew were dangerous. My professional expertise in detecting healthcare fraud had been neutralized by emotional investment in the person committing it. The grandfather clock in our foyer chimed 8 times, marking the beginning of a day that would end with either a reasonable explanation or the complete destruction of my marriage. But as I stared at the evidence spread across my laptop screen, I realized I was already past the point where reasonable explanations were possible. Jonathan Cross had committed federal fraud, medical fraud, and SEC violations while lying to his wife about nearly dying. The only question now was how deep the conspiracy went and how many people had been harmed by devices he knew were defective. I saved the evidence files to an encrypted drive and prepared for the most important audit of my career. By the time Jonathan's plane landed at Logan Airport, I would know everything there was to know about Cross Medical Devices, its fraudulent practices, and the criminal enterprise my husband had built around medical devices that could kill the patients they were supposed to save. By 11 a.m., I'd uncovered enough evidence to destroy Jonathan's company, his reputation, and quite possibly his freedom. But as I sat surrounded by financial documents that proved systematic fraud, a nagging thought kept interrupting my professional satisfaction. How could I use this information without destroying myself in the process? Jonathan wasn't just my husband, he was my business partner, my co-signer on our mortgage, and the primary income source for our lifestyle. If Cross Medical collapsed under federal investigation, I'd lose everything too. We had joint accounts, shared assets, and 7 years of financial entanglement that couldn't be untangled without massive personal cost. Unless... I walked to our home office and opened the fireproof safe where we kept important documents. Birth certificates, passports, insurance policies, and buried beneath years of accumulated paperwork, our prenuptial agreement. I'd insisted on the prenup over Jonathan's objections, drawing on my experience auditing divorce proceedings, where business assets had been devastated by marital disputes. It's not about not trusting you, I'd explained at the time. It's about protecting both of us if something unexpected happens. Jonathan had eventually agreed, though his mother Catherine had made her displeasure clear. Prenups are for people who plan to fail, she'd said over dinner at her Lewisburg Square mansion, but I'd held firm and Jonathan had signed. Now sitting in our office with morning light streaming through the windows, I opened the document that I hadn't looked at since our wedding day. My attorney, Sarah Chen from Ropes and Gray, had drafted comprehensive protections for both parties, including provisions I'd forgotten in the romantic haze of engagement. Page 12 contained the clause that would change everything. Section 7.3, Criminal Activity Nullification. In the event that either party is convicted of pleads guilty to or is found civilly liable for criminal activity related to their business or professional conduct. All spousal protections under this agreement are immediately nullified. The non-offending party shall retain full rights to all marital assets acquired through legitimate means, while the offending party forfeits all claims to jointly held property and assets. Section 7.4, Whistleblower Protection. Should either party provide information leading to criminal charges against the other party, this shall not constitute a violation of marital confidentiality clauses, and the informing party shall be entitled to full asset protection under applicable federal whistleblower statutes. I read the clauses 3 times, hardly believing what Sarah's careful legal language had created. The prenup that Jonathan had reluctantly signed contained the exact mechanism I needed to protect myself while exposing his crimes. If I reported Jonathan's fraud to federal authorities and he was subsequently convicted, I would retain full ownership of all legitimately acquired assets while he lost everything. The prenup didn't just protect me from his criminal liability, it incentivized me to expose it. But there was more. I called Sarah's office and was connected immediately, one advantage of paying Ropes and Gray's premium rates for ongoing legal consultation. Elena, what a pleasant surprise. How are you and Jonathan? Sarah, I need to discuss our prenuptial agreement, specifically the criminal activity clauses. Could you walk me through the implications if hypothetically one spouse discovered the other was committing federal fraud? The pause was brief but telling. Sarah had spent 20 years drafting prenups for Boston's elite, and she'd learned to read between the lines when clients called with hypothetical questions. "Elena, are you calling from a secure location?" "I'm at home. Jonathan is traveling." "Switch to a secure line. Call me back from your cell phone, not the house phone. This conversation may be privileged, but it's better to be cautious." 20 minutes later, I was sitting in my car in the Boston Common parking garage, speaking to Sarah through encrypted phone apps she'd recommended. "Elena, the clauses you're asking about were specifically designed for situations involving professional fraud or criminal business conduct. If Jonathan has committed crimes related to Cross Medical and you provide evidence leading to his prosecution, the prenup protects you completely." What does full asset protection mean exactly? Everything legitimately acquired during the marriage becomes yours. The house, the car's legitimate investment accounts, your retirement funds. Jonathan would retain only assets he can prove were acquired through legal means before the marriage. I thought about our financial situation. The Beacon Hill townhouse had been a wedding gift from Catherine, technically making it a marital asset. My retirement accounts and legitimate consulting income represented hundreds of thousands in protected wealth. Jonathan's Cross Medical equity would become worthless if the company collapsed, but everything else would be mine. "Sarah, what about spousal liability for his crimes? The whistleblower protection clause shields you from any civil liability related to his criminal conduct, provided you cooperate fully with authorities. You can't be held responsible for fraudulent business practices you weren't aware of and didn't participate in." "And if I was aware but didn't participate?" Another pause. "Elena, as your attorney, I need to advise you that if you have knowledge of ongoing criminal activity and fail to report it, you could face charges for conspiracy or aiding and abetting. However, if you discover criminal activity and promptly report it to appropriate authorities, that demonstrates good faith cooperation." The implications crystallized with stunning clarity. Jonathan had created the perfect trap for himself. His reluctant signature on a prenup designed to protect both spouses had instead created a legal mechanism that would destroy him while protecting me. More than that, my professional obligation as a CPA required me to report suspected fraud, especially healthcare fraud that could harm patients. I wasn't just legally protected for exposing Jonathan's crimes, I was professionally obligated to do so. "Sarah, I need to ask you something else. If I discovered that medical devices from Jonathan's company were defective and being sold to hospitals, what's my legal obligation?" As a certified public accountant, you have a professional duty to report suspected fraud to appropriate authorities. Healthcare fraud that endangers patients adds federal whistleblower protections that could include financial compensation for reporting. The irony was perfect. Jonathan's insistence on marrying a forensic accountant had given him access to someone with the exact skills needed to uncover his fraud. His reluctant agreement to sign a comprehensive prenup had created the legal framework for his own destruction. His decision to fake a medical emergency using non-existent devices had provided the evidence trail I needed to prove systematic criminal behavior. "Elena," Sarah continued, "I need to ask directly, have you discovered evidence of criminal activity?" I looked at the encrypted drive containing 6 hours of investigative work that had revealed federal fraud medical device violations, SEC violations, and conspiracy to defraud regulators. "Yes, extensive evidence." "Then you need to contact federal authorities immediately. Every day you delay reporting known healthcare fraud increases your potential liability as an accessory. I can refer you to attorneys who specialize in federal whistleblower cases if you'd like to proceed with full legal protection." I ended the call and sat in my car surrounded by the elegant brownstones of Beacon Hill while processing the magnitude of what Jonathan had done to himself. He'd married a forensic accountant, signed a prenup that protected whistleblowers, and committed fraud so extensive that my professional obligations required me to destroy him. The man who'd swept me off my feet at a medical conference had created the perfect conditions for his own downfall. All I had to do was fulfill my professional duties as a CPA and let the legal mechanisms he'd agreed to 7 years ago work exactly as they'd been designed. My phone buzzed with a text from Jonathan. "Flight delayed 2 hours. Can't wait to see you tonight. Love you." I stared at the message from the man who'd faked a heart attack to defraud federal regulators while selling defective medical devices to hospitals. The man who'd lied to me for months while I unknowingly benefited from funds that should have been used to protect patients from dangerous equipment. By the time Jonathan landed at Logan Airport, I would have reported him to the FBI, the FDA, and the Securities and Exchange Commission. The prenup he'd signed would protect me from his crimes while ensuring that his conviction would transfer all our legitimate assets to my name. It was the most devastating audit I'd ever conducted, and it had taken me less than 8 hours to complete. I drove home from Boston Common with the methodical calm that comes from making an irreversible decision. The emotional turmoil of discovering Jonathan's betrayal had crystallized into something far more powerful: professional purpose backed by legal protection and moral certainty. Back in our townhouse, I arranged the evidence chronologically across our dining room table. The same mahogany surface where we'd signed our tax returns, celebrated anniversaries, and planned our future together. Now it would serve as the foundation for systematically dismantling everything Jonathan had built through fraud and deception. The irony wasn't lost on me. Jonathan had always praised my brilliant forensic instincts when they were applied to other people's crimes. Now those same instincts would be focused on him with the precision that had made my reputation at PricewaterhouseCoopers. I opened my laptop and created a detailed timeline of Cross Medical's fraudulent activities. Phase 1, Device Development Problems, 2022-2023. Engineering reports showing 40% failure rates. Internal emails acknowledging safety concerns. FDA preliminary rejection of CardioMax Pro application, Phase 2. Fraudulent delay tactics, June-August 2024. Creation of shell companies for fake medical billing. Fabrication of Jonathan's cardiac emergency. Fraudulent medical procedures and device implantation. FDA review postponement based on fabricated medical crisis. Phase 3, ongoing deception, September-December 2024. Continued marketing of unapproved devices. Patient treatments using equipment known to be defective. SEC filings claiming successful FDA progress. Insurance fraud through fake medical claims. The pattern was clear, systematic, and absolutely devastating from a federal prosecution standpoint. Jonathan hadn't committed isolated fraud, he'd orchestrated a continuing criminal enterprise that put patients at risk while defrauding multiple government agencies. My phone rang. Sarah Chen's office. Elena, I've consulted with our federal crime specialists. Based on what you've described, you need to contact the FBI's healthcare fraud unit immediately. I'm sending you contact information for Agent Maria Santos. She specializes in medical device fraud and has an excellent track record with whistleblower cases. How quickly does this need to happen? Today, every day of delay could be interpreted as complicity. Healthcare fraud that endangers patients is considered an ongoing emergency by federal authorities. I hung up and stared at the contact information Sarah had just sent. Agent Maria Santos, FBI Boston Field Office, Healthcare Fraud Task Force. One phone call would transform me from Jonathan's wife into the federal informant responsible for destroying his criminal enterprise. But first I needed to secure additional evidence. Jonathan's laptop contained files I couldn't access remotely, and his home office safe held documents that might disappear if he suspected investigation. I spent the next hour methodically photographing every document, copying every file, and creating multiple encrypted backups of evidence that would soon become federal property. The forensic accountant in me insisted on maintaining chain of custody protocols even for evidence I'd gathered legally from my own home. At 2:47 p.m., I dialed Agent Santos's direct number. Santos Healthcare Fraud Task Force. Agent Santos, my name is Elena Cross. I'm a certified public accountant and I need to report extensive healthcare fraud involving my husband's medical device company. Mrs. Cross, are you calling from a secure location? Yes, my home office. I need to meet with you immediately. How soon can you come to our field office? I have extensive documentation. How much time should I plan for? Plan for the rest of the day, bring everything. As I gathered the evidence files, my phone buzzed with another text from Jonathan. Boston weather looks beautiful from the plane. Looking forward to our quiet evening together. I looked around our home office, the antique desk where I'd built my consulting practice, the built-in bookshelves filled with accounting textbooks and regulatory manuals, the window overlooking Beacon Street where we'd watched seasons change together for 7 years. By tonight, federal agents would be preparing search warrants for Cross Medical's offices. By tomorrow, Jonathan would likely be under arrest. By next week, news outlets would be reporting the collapse of one of Boston's most promising medical device companies. But patients would be protected from defective equipment. Federal agencies would recover millions in fraudulent payments, and justice would be served for crimes that could have killed innocent people trusting Jonathan's devices with their lives. I closed my laptop, gathered the evidence files, and walked toward the door of the house I'd soon own completely, thanks to the prenup Jonathan had reluctantly signed 7 years ago. The audit of Jonathan Cross was officially beginning. And unlike every other audit of my career, this one would end with the subject in federal prison. While I rebuilt my life from the legitimate assets his conviction would transfer to my name. The grandfather clock chimed 3 times as I left for the FBI field office, carrying evidence that would transform me from victim to victor in the span of a single afternoon. It was time to show Jonathan what happened when you lied to a forensic accountant about committing federal crimes. The lesson would be more expensive than he could possibly imagine. The FBI Boston field office occupied a modern glass building in Government Center that felt appropriately intimidating as I approached with my evidence files at 3:30 p.m. Agent Maria Santos met me in the lobby, a woman in her early 40s with sharp eyes and the kind of focused intensity that suggested she'd spent years dealing with healthcare criminals who thought they were untouchable. "Mrs. Cross, thank you for coming in immediately. Let's go somewhere we can talk privately." She led me to a secure conference room where another agent was waiting, a tall man with graying temples who introduced himself as Agent David Kim, Sr., investigator for the Healthcare Fraud Task Force. "Mrs. Cross," Agent Santos began. "Before we start, I need to understand your relationship to Cross Medical Devices and your knowledge of any criminal activities. I'm a certified public accountant with 12 years of experience in forensic accounting, specializing in healthcare fraud detection. I discovered evidence of systematic fraud by my husband's company this morning while reviewing medical insurance documents." I placed the first evidence file on the table. Jonathan Cross fabricated a cardiac emergency to delay FDA review of a defective medical device. He's been selling unapproved equipment to hospitals while using shell companies to create fake medical billing records. Agent Kim leaned forward. "Mrs. Cross, we've been investigating Cross Medical Devices for 14 months. Your husband's company has been on our radar since we received complaints from hospital staff about device failures." The revelation hit me like cold water. "You've been investigating for over a year. Dr. James Liu at Mass General reported multiple CardioMax device malfunctions in August 2023, Agent Santos explained. Patients experienced near-fatal complications when the devices failed during critical procedures. We've been building a case, but we needed inside access to Cross Medical's financial records." "Which you now have," I said, understanding immediately how valuable my evidence would be to their existing investigation. "Mrs. Cross, what you've brought us represents the missing piece of a federal case we've been developing. But I need to ask, are you prepared for the full implications of cooperating with our investigation?" I thought about the prenup sitting in my safe, the patients who trusted Jonathan's defective devices, and the federal obligation I had as a CPA to report healthcare fraud. "Agent Santos, I discovered this morning that my husband has been committing crimes that could kill people. I'm not just prepared to cooperate, I'm professionally obligated to do so." Agent Kim smiled grimly. "Then let's talk about what we need from you." For the next 2 hours, I walked them through every piece of evidence I'd gathered, explaining the financial patterns that revealed systematic fraud spanning multiple federal agencies. The agents took detailed notes, photographed documents, and asked increasingly sophisticated questions about Cross Medical's corporate structure. "Mati, Skawoe, Mrs. Cross," Agent Santos said finally. "Your forensic analysis is extraordinary. You've identified fraud patterns in 6 hours that took our financial crimes unit 6 months to develop." "I had advantages you didn't," I replied. "Access to personal financial records, knowledge of Jonathan's behavioral patterns, and professional expertise in healthcare fraud detection." Agent Kim consulted his notes. "We'd like to bring in additional specialists to review your evidence. Are you available tomorrow morning for an expanded briefing?" "Of course. But I need to ask Jonathan returns from San Diego tonight. How do I handle that without compromising your investigation?" "Act normally," Agent Santos advised. "Don't let him know you've discovered anything. We'll need time to coordinate with other agencies before making arrests." As I prepared to leave, Agent Santos handed me a card. Mrs. Cross, this case is going to become very complex very quickly. Cross Medical's fraud appears to connect to a larger network of medical device companies engaged in similar schemes. You're going to need specialized legal representation. I have an attorney, Sarah Chen at Ropes & Gray. Sarah's excellent for family law, but you need someone who specializes in federal whistleblower cases. I'm going to give you the name of someone who's handled cases like this before. She wrote down contact information for attorney Jennifer Walsh at the Department of Justice Whistleblower Protection Unit. Call her tonight. She can explain the federal protections available to you and help coordinate your legal strategy with our investigation. I drove home through Boston evening traffic with the strange sensation of living in two realities simultaneously. In one reality, I was Elena Cross, married to a successful medical device entrepreneur, returning home to prepare dinner for my husband's return from a business trip. In the other reality, I was a federal informant whose evidence would soon destroy everything Jonathan had built, while protecting me through legal mechanisms he'd unknowingly created. The townhouse felt different as I unlocked the front door. Every room now seemed like potential evidence in a federal case. Our shared computer contained files that would become prosecution exhibits. Our joint bank accounts held funds that would be frozen during asset seizure proceedings. Our marriage certificate would soon be superseded by a prenup that would transfer all legitimate assets to my name upon Jonathan's conviction. I called Jennifer Walsh from my cell phone while standing in our kitchen, looking out at Beacon Street, where life continued normally while my world underwent complete transformation. Mrs. Cross, Agent Santos briefed me on your situation. You're in an unusual position. Most whistleblowers don't have your forensic expertise or legal protections. We need to discuss strategy immediately. What kind of strategy? How to maximize your cooperation with federal investigators while ensuring you receive full protection under whistleblower statutes. Your prenup creates unique opportunities, but we need to coordinate with multiple agencies. Multiple agencies? The FBI is handling criminal fraud charges. The FDA will investigate device approval violations. The Securities and Exchange Commission will examine corporate disclosure failures. The Department of Justice will coordinate prosecution. You're potentially the key witness in cases involving 4 federal agencies. The scope was overwhelming. Attorney Walsh, I discovered this fraud 12 hours ago. How did it become so complex so quickly? Healthcare fraud involving medical devices triggers multiple federal jurisdictions. When you add securities fraud and regulatory violations, it becomes a major federal case. The good news is that federal whistleblower protections are extensive and your evidence is extraordinarily comprehensive. She explained the timeline for coordination between agencies, the process for formal whistleblower status, and the financial protections I'd receive. By the time I hung up, I understood that I wasn't just reporting Jonathan's crimes. I was becoming the central witness in a federal prosecution that would reshape medical device regulation. At 8:15 p.m., I heard Jonathan's key in the front door. "Elena, I'm home." His voice carried the warm familiarity of 7 years of marriage, but now I heard something else underneath the confident tone of someone who believed his secrets were safe. "Welcome home." I called from the kitchen where I was preparing the salmon dinner I'd planned before discovering he was a federal criminal. "How was San Diego?" Jonathan appeared in the kitchen doorway, still wearing his expensive suit, looking like the successful entrepreneur who'd swept me off my feet at a medical conference 7 years ago. He kissed me on the cheek, the same gesture of affection that had once made me feel cherished and now felt like contamination. "The conference was incredible," he said, opening a bottle of wine while I continued cooking. "Dr. Martinez from UCLA is interested in partnering with us on the next-generation CardioMax devices. He thinks we're going to revolutionize cardiac care." As I listened to Jonathan describe technological breakthroughs that I now knew were built on defective devices, research partnerships based on fraudulent data, and medical advances that existed only in his imagination. Every word was delivered with the passionate conviction that had made me believe in his vision for years. "That sounds promising," I managed. "Any updates on the FDA approval timeline?" "Still working through some regulatory details, but I'm optimistic we'll have resolution soon. Dr. Richardson thinks the FDA just needs more time to understand the innovation we're bringing to market." Dr. Richardson, who'd hung up on me this morning when I'd asked about the non-existent defibrillator. The same Dr. Richardson who is apparently part of Jonathan's conspiracy to defraud federal regulators. "I'm sure everything will work out. I said, placing his dinner in front of him, while calculating how many federal crimes he'd just referenced in casual conversation. As we ate, Jonathan talked about his business plans with the enthusiasm that had always been infectious. He described investor meetings, technology partnerships, and market expansion opportunities that would have excited me yesterday, but now sounded like the elaborate fantasies of someone who'd built his entire professional life on lies. "Elena, I've been thinking," he said over dessert. "Once the FDA approval comes through and we get our next round of funding, maybe we should start planning that family we've talked about." The suggestion felt like a physical blow. Jonathan was planning our future while committing crimes that would send him to federal prison. He was talking about having children while selling medical devices that could kill other people's children. "That's something to think about," I replied, knowing that by the time his FDA approval was supposed to arrive, he'd be under federal arrest. After dinner, Jonathan retreated to his home office to catch up on emails, while I cleaned the kitchen and contemplated the surreal experience of maintaining normal domestic routines while coordinating a federal investigation. My phone buzzed with a secure message from Agent Santos. "Emergency briefing tomorrow, 7 a.m. Additional evidence has surfaced involving cross-medical devices and patient deaths. Critical that you maintain normal behavior tonight." Patient deaths. The words hit me like ice water. Jonathan's fraud wasn't just about money or regulatory violations. People had actually died because of his defective devices. I walked upstairs to our bedroom where Jonathan was already asleep, probably dreaming about business success built on a foundation of lies that would soon collapse around him. I lay awake next to the man I'd married, listening to him breathe peacefully, while patients' families somewhere grieved deaths that might have been prevented if he'd prioritized safety over profit. By morning, I would learn the full extent of his crimes. By evening, I would understand how many people had been harmed by devices he knew were dangerous. By the end of the week, Jonathan Cross would discover that marrying a forensic accountant with federal whistleblower protections was the most expensive mistake of his criminal career. But tonight, I lay in our bed surrounded by the comfortable illusion of a marriage that was already over, listening to the grandfather clock mark time until morning brought the next phase of Jonathan's reckoning. The systematic evidence-gathering phase of my investigation had revealed federal crimes spanning multiple agencies. Tomorrow would bring evidence of the human cost, and the moment when I'd fully understand that protecting Jonathan's victims required destroying the man I'd once loved. At 6:30 a.m., I dressed for the emergency FBI briefing, while Jonathan slept peacefully beside me, unaware that his wife had spent the night becoming a federal informant whose testimony would soon dismantle everything he'd built through systematic fraud and deception. The second day of auditing, Jonathan Cross, was about to begin, and I suspected it would be far worse than the first. The FBI briefing room at 7 a.m. contained more people than I'd expected. Agent Santos introduced me to Dr. James Liu from Mass General FDA. Inspector Patricia Williams, SEC Investigator Michael Torres, and DOJ Prosecutor Jennifer Walsh, all of whom had been working parallel investigations into Cross Medical's criminal activities. "Mrs. Cross," Dr. Liu began, "I need to show you something that will be difficult to see, but it's crucial that you understand the scope of your husband's crimes." He placed a thick medical file on the table. Sarah Martinez, age 34, mother of 2. She received a cross-medical CardioMax device in September 2023 during emergency cardiac surgery. The device failed during a routine follow-up procedure, causing massive cardiac arrest. She died on the operating table. The photograph showed a young woman with dark hair and a warm smile holding 2 small children. I stared at the image while Dr. Liu continued. David Chen, age 67, retired teacher. Cross-medical device failure during a stress test caused fatal arrhythmia in October 2023. Michael Rodriguez, age 42, construction worker. Device malfunction during routine monitoring triggered heart failure in November 2023. More photographs, more victims, more families destroyed by devices Jonathan knew were defective. Each image represented a person who'd trusted the medical system to protect them only to be killed by equipment that should never have been approved for human use. "How many?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "Confirmed deaths directly attributable to cross-medical device failures, 17 thou," FDA Inspector Williams replied. "Serious injuries requiring emergency intervention, 43. Near-fatal complications that were successfully treated, 67. 127 people had been harmed by Jonathan's devices. 17 families had lost loved ones because my husband prioritized profit over patient safety. Medicam, Ms. Cross. Prosecutor Walsh said gently, I know this is overwhelming, but I need you to understand why your cooperation is so critical. These deaths weren't accidents, they were the predictable result of putting defective devices in patients when the manufacturer knew they were dangerous. Agent Santos opened another file. Your evidence about Jonathan's fabricated heart attack proves he was aware of device problems and actively worked to conceal them from FDA oversight. That transforms these deaths from negligent homicide to second-degree murder under federal statutes. The legal implications crystallized with horrifying clarity. Jonathan wasn't just committing fraud, he was committing murder. Every patient who died from device failure was a victim of his conscious decision to conceal known safety problems from regulators. Mrs. Cross, Dr. Liu continued, there's something else you need to know. We believe cross-medical devices are still being implanted in patients right now, even as we speak. Every day of delay in stopping this allows more people to receive potentially fatal equipment. The urgency was overwhelming. While I'd been sleeping next to Jonathan patients in hospitals across the country, were receiving devices that could kill them. While he'd been talking about starting a family, other families were being destroyed by his criminal negligence. What do you need from me? I asked. Agent Santos consulted her notes. We need you to help us understand Cross Medical's financial structure, identify co-conspirators, and provide ongoing access to Jonathan's communications. But most importantly, we need you to help us build a case strong enough to ensure he never has the opportunity to harm patients again. Mrs. Cross, SEC investigator Torres added, your husband's fraud extends beyond device safety. Cross Medical has been filing false financial statements claiming successful FDA progress while knowing their devices were being rejected. Investors have lost over $50 million based on fraudulent representations. How long has this been going on? Based on our investigation, systematic fraud began in early 2022, when the first device safety problems emerged. Jonathan chose to conceal problems rather than address them, then escalated to fabricating medical emergencies when concealment became impossible. 2.5 years of conscious criminal activity, 2.5 years of putting patients at risk while lying to investors, regulators, and his own wife about the true state of his company. Mrs. Cross, Prosecutor Walsh said, I need to explain something about federal whistleblower protections. You're not just entitled to legal immunity, you're entitled to financial compensation for reporting this fraud. Under the False Claims Act, whistleblowers receive up to 30% of recovered funds. Recovered funds. Federal healthcare fraud penalties, SEC fines, victim compensation orders, asset forfeitures. The total could exceed $200 million. Your compensation could be substantial. The irony was staggering. Not only would Jonathan's conviction transfer our legitimate marital assets to me through the prenup, but federal law would also compensate me for exposing his crimes. The man who'd thought he was building wealth through fraud had instead created the mechanism for his wife to become wealthy by destroying him. What happens next? I asked. Agent Santos outlined the timeline. Today, we finalize coordination between agencies. Tomorrow, we execute search warrants on Cross Medical offices and begin arrests of co-conspirators. By Friday, Jonathan will be in federal custody. Monsieur and Mrs. Cross, Dr. Liu added, we also need to discuss patient notification. Hospitals need to be warned about device risks, and patients with Cross Medical implants need emergency medical evaluation. The scope kept expanding. This wasn't just about prosecuting Jonathan, it was about protecting current patients, compensating victims' families, and reforming medical device oversight to prevent future tragedies. As the briefing concluded, I realized that I'd moved beyond being a betrayed wife seeking justice. I'd become the central figure in a federal prosecution that would reshape healthcare regulation, provide justice for 17 murdered patients, and ensure that Jonathan Cross spent the rest of his life in prison for crimes that had killed innocent people. The evidence-gathering phase was complete. The escalation phase was about to begin, and it would be far more devastating than anything I could have imagined when I'd first discovered that invoice for a non-existent medical device. By tomorrow night, Jonathan's world would be in ruins. By next week, the man who'd faked a heart attack to conceal murder would be facing federal charges that carried life sentences. The audit of Jonathan Cross had revealed systematic fraud, regulatory violations, securities crimes, and 17 counts of second-degree murder. The only question now was whether he'd understand what had happened to him before the handcuffs locked around his wrists. I drove home from the FBI briefing knowing that I would spend one final day married to a man who'd killed 17 people while lying to me about nearly dying himself. Tomorrow, I would watch federal agents arrest the person I'd once planned to build a family with, and I would feel nothing but satisfaction that justice was finally being served. The escalation was about to begin, and Jonathan Cross had no idea that his wife had just become the most dangerous person in his life. Sarah Kim arrived at Elena's Greenwich home at 6:47 a.m., carrying 2 large coffee cups and the kind of focused intensity that Elena remembered from their law school days at Yale. Sarah had built her practice around protecting elderly clients from financial predators, and she'd developed an almost supernatural ability to spot sophisticated fraud schemes. "Show me everything," Sarah said without preamble, settling into Elena's home office like a general preparing for war. Elena spread the documents across her desk. The forged power of attorney forms the SEC compliance filings, the corporate formation papers for entities she'd never heard of. Sarah reviewed each document with the methodical precision of someone who'd seen every variation of financial elder abuse. "This is sophisticated," Sarah said after 20 minutes of silent analysis. "Whoever did this understands both SEC regulations and identity theft law. They've created a framework where you appear to be the architect of whatever criminal enterprise they're running." "Michael's been planning this for years," Elena replied. "The question is whether I can prove it before federal investigators decide I'm the mastermind." Sarah pulled out her phone. "I'm calling someone you need to meet. David Park, cybersecurity expert, former NSA. He specializes in digital forensics for financial crimes. If Michael's been forging documents and creating false digital trails, David can prove it." While Sarah made arrangements, Elena prepared for her 9 a.m. meeting with Agent Marcus Torres. She'd worked with Torres on 3 major fraud investigations, including the notorious Greenwich grandmother case that had made national headlines. Torres understood the complexities of investment fraud, and more importantly, he trusted Elena's analytical abilities. Agent Torres arrived precisely on time, accompanied by SEC enforcement attorney Lisa Chen, no relation to Michael despite the shared surname. Lisa specialized in Ponzi scheme prosecutions and had an impressive track record of recovering assets for defrauded investors. Elena, Torres said, settling into her living room. "When you called yesterday, you mentioned a $400 million fraud scheme. That number tends to get our attention." Elena handed each of them a bound folder containing her preliminary analysis. Chen & Associates is operating a classic Ponzi scheme using new investor funds to pay fake returns to existing clients. The total amount at risk is approximately $847 million based on their SEC filings. Lisa Chen looked up from the documents, her expression grave. "And you believe your husband has positioned you as the responsible party?" "I believe my husband has spent 8 years creating a false identity for me as a criminal mastermind. Look at page 12. SEC compliance forms indicating that I've been managing the firm's alternative investment division since 2019. I've never set foot in their offices in a professional capacity." Torres reviewed the evidence with the systematic approach Elena had seen him use in dozens of investigations. "The signature analysis alone won't be sufficient. We'll need digital evidence, communication records, proof that you weren't involved in the day-to-day operations." "That's where David Park comes in," Sarah interjected. "He's meeting us here this afternoon to begin digital forensics analysis." Lisa Chen closed her folder and looked directly at Elena. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Is there any possibility that you were involved in these activities and simply don't remember due to stress or illness?" Elena met her gaze steadily. "Lisa, I have eidetic memory for financial documents and mathematical analysis. It's the foundation of my entire career. If I had structured an $847 million investment scheme, I would remember every detail of every transaction." "Fair enough. But Elena, you need to understand the position you're in. If we investigate Chen & Associates and find evidence of fraud, you're currently listed as the person responsible for the fraudulent activities. We'll need overwhelming evidence of your innocence before we can move forward." Torres nodded agreement. "Elena, we've worked together for years. I trust your integrity completely. But a federal prosecutor looking at these documents won't have that history. They'll see a brilliant forensic accountant who got greedy and used her expertise to defraud investors. Elena had expected this reaction, but hearing it articulated made the reality sink in. Michael hadn't just stolen her identity. He'd weaponized her reputation and expertise against her. "What do you need from me?" she asked. "Everything," Lisa replied. "Every communication with Michael about business matters, every document you've ever signed, every conversation you can remember about his work. We need to build a timeline proving you had no knowledge of or involvement in the fraudulent activities." Sarah leaned forward. "There's another angle we need to consider. Elena was just diagnosed with breast cancer. The timing isn't coincidental. If Michael's been planning to liquidate the scheme, Elena's illness provides perfect cover." Torres made a note. "Explain that." "Think about it." Elena said, the pattern becoming clear as she spoke. "I'm diagnosed with cancer. I take medical leave from the SEC. I'm distracted by treatment and potentially incapacitated. Michael has power of attorney over my finances. He could liquidate everything, disappear to a non-extradition country, and leave me to face federal prosecutors while I'm fighting for my life." Lisa Chen's expression hardened. "That's sociopathic. That's profitable," Sarah corrected grimly. "And it's exactly the kind of calculated manipulation we see in financial abuse cases." Torres stood up. "Elena, I'm going to be direct with you. This investigation could take months, possibly years. Are you prepared for that level of stress while you're undergoing cancer treatment?" Elena looked around her office at the awards and commendations that represented 15 years of fighting financial criminals. "Marcus, I've spent my entire career putting people like Michael in federal prison. I'm not about to let him destroy me just because I have cancer." "All right then," Torres said with a slight smile. "Let's destroy him first." David Park arrived that afternoon looking exactly like Elena's mental image of a former NSA analyst, unassuming appearance that masked formidable technical expertise. He set up his equipment in Elena's office with the efficiency of someone who'd conducted hundreds of digital forensics investigations. Sarah explained the situation. He said, connecting his laptop to Elena's home network. "We're looking for evidence that someone else has been using your digital identity to conduct business activities you weren't aware of." "What exactly can you detect?" Elena asked. "Login patterns, IP address analysis, keystroke analysis if we're lucky. If Michael's been accessing accounts in your name or if he's been creating documents with forged digital signatures, I can prove it." David's fingers flew across his keyboard with the same intensity Elena brought to financial analysis. "Elena, I need you to walk me through your normal computer usage patterns. What accounts do you access regularly? What software do you use? When do you typically work from home versus the office?" Elena provided detailed information about her digital habits while David mapped her legitimate online activities. After 2 hours of analysis, he looked up with the expression of someone who'd found exactly what he'd hoped to find. "Elena, someone has been systematically accessing accounts in your name from locations you've never been to, at times when you can prove you were elsewhere. More importantly, they've been using sophisticated software to forge your digital signatures on documents you've never seen. Can you prove it wasn't me?" David turned his laptop screen toward her. "See these login records for your investment advisory accounts. Someone accessed them from Chen & Associates offices at 3:47 a.m. on 15 different occasions over the past 2 years. Security camera records from your SEC office show you were working late on those exact dates physically present in Hartford while someone else was conducting business in your name in Greenwich." Elena felt the first surge of genuine hope since discovering Michael's crimes. That's alibis for 15 separate incidents of identity theft. "It gets better," David continued. "The software being used to forge your digital signatures has a unique algorithmic fingerprint. I can trace it to a specific vendor that specializes in identity management solutions for high-end financial fraud." Sarah was taking notes rapidly. "David, how quickly can you prepare a forensic report documenting all of this?" 72 hours, but Elena, there's something else you need to know. The activity patterns suggest this has been going on much longer than you realize. I'm seeing evidence of identity theft dating back to 2016. Elena felt sick. 2 years before we got married. Michael's been planning this for nearly a decade, Sarah said grimly. Elena, this wasn't a crime of opportunity. This was a long-term strategy to position you as a criminal co-conspirator. Elena looked at the evidence accumulating on her desk, the digital proof that her marriage had been a lie from the beginning. Michael hadn't fallen in love with her. He'd targeted her for her credentials, her reputation, and her potential usefulness as a fall guy. But Michael had made one critical error in his planning. He'd assumed that Elena would be too distracted by cancer, too emotionally devastated by betrayal, and too legally compromised to fight back effectively. Michael Chen was about to learn that he'd just declared war on the most dangerous opponent he could have chosen, a brilliant forensic accountant with nothing left to lose and every resource necessary to destroy him completely. Elena's systematic dismantling of Michael's criminal empire began at 4:30 a.m. the following morning. Cancer had disrupted her sleep schedule anyway, and she'd discovered that her mind was sharpest in the pre-dawn hours when the world was quiet and her analytical abilities could operate without distraction. She established a war room in her home office, converting her dining room table into a command center for what would become the most complex financial investigation of her career. 3 computer monitors displayed different aspects of the growing case: client records, financial transfers, and regulatory filings. A 4th screen showed real-time monitoring of accounts Michael didn't know she could access. David Park had installed sophisticated tracking software that would alert Elena whenever someone accessed accounts in her name. Within the first 6 hours of monitoring, she documented 12 separate instances of Michael conducting business using her digital identity. He's not even trying to hide it anymore, Elena told Sarah during their daily morning call. David's software is capturing everything. Emails sent in my name, investment authorizations I never approved, client communications discussing strategies I never developed. Elena's first major breakthrough came from analyzing Chen & Associates' client list. Using her SEC access credentials, which remained valid during her medical leave, she cross-referenced the firm's reported client base with actual investment account records. The discrepancies were staggering. Chen & Associates claimed to manage investments for 847 high-net-worth clients with a total portfolio value of $2.1 billion. Elena's analysis revealed that only 312 clients actually existed, and their legitimate investments totaled approximately $400 million. The remaining $1.7 billion in assets under management existed only on paper. Elena mapped the flow of money with the same methodical precision she'd used to dismantle international money laundering operations. New client investments went directly into operational accounts that Michael controlled. A portion was used to pay fake returns to existing clients, while the majority disappeared into a labyrinth of offshore accounts and shell companies. The sophistication of Michael's scheme was genuinely impressive. He'd created multiple layers of legitimacy: actual investment products that generated modest returns, real client relationships that provided testimonials and referrals, and carefully constructed financial statements that would satisfy casual regulatory review. But Elena wasn't conducting casual review. She was performing the kind of deep forensic analysis that had made her reputation at the SEC. Elena's breakthrough came when she discovered Michael's insurance policy, a detailed digital ledger, tracking every fraudulent transaction, every fake client account, and every dollar stolen from legitimate investors. Michael had been keeping meticulous records of his crimes, presumably to facilitate rapid liquidation, when the scheme inevitably collapsed. Why would he document everything so thoroughly? Sarah asked during one of their evening strategy sessions. Control, Elena replied, studying Michael's digital records. Ponzi schemes collapse when the operator loses track of the money flow. Michael's been maintaining detailed records to ensure he could liquidate efficiently when the time came. Elena discovered that Michael's exit strategy was already in motion. He'd been gradually moving money out of client accounts and into offshore vehicles that would be difficult for federal investigators to trace. The pace of these transfers had accelerated dramatically in the past 6 months, well before Elena's cancer diagnosis. The cancer didn't trigger his exit strategy, Elena realized during a late-night analysis session. He'd already decided to collapse the scheme. My illness just provided convenient cover. Elena's investigation revealed the true scope of Michael's crimes extended far beyond simple Ponzi scheme mechanics. He'd been systematically targeting elderly clients who were particularly vulnerable to financial manipulation. She found recorded phone conversations where Michael used Elena's credentials to convince clients to make risky investments. "My wife is Elena Vasquez from the SEC," he would say. "She's designed some exclusive investment vehicles for qualified clients." Elena listened to hours of these recordings, her disgust growing with each conversation. Michael wasn't just stealing money. He was exploiting her reputation to defraud people who trusted her professional integrity. The emotional impact was devastating, but Elena channeled her anger into analytical precision. She documented every client contact, every fraudulent representation, every dollar stolen using her name and credentials. Elena's most damning discovery came from Michael's email communications with co-conspirators. She found detailed discussions about managing the Elena problem that dated back to 2020. "Elena's getting too close to the investment side of things," Michael had written to someone identified only as JP. "We need to create more separation between her work and our activities." The response was chilling. "Have you considered the medical angle create a health crisis that would incapacitate her during the liquidation phase?" Elena stared at the email exchange, trying to process the implication. Had Michael somehow caused her cancer? Was her illness part of his criminal strategy? She spent 3 days researching the question, consulting with oncologists and toxicology experts. The conclusion was that Michael couldn't have deliberately caused her specific type of breast cancer. But the timing of his liquidation strategy and her diagnosis was undeniably convenient for his purposes. Elena documented Michael's communications with his co-conspirators, mapping a network of individuals who'd helped him operate the scheme. JP was identified as James Patterson, Michael's brother-in-law, who ran a series of shell companies that laundered stolen funds. AR was Angela Rodriguez, a former SEC compliance officer who'd been providing inside information about regulatory investigations. The corruption extended deeper than Elena had imagined. Michael hadn't just created a Ponzi scheme. He'd built a criminal organization that included corrupt government officials, complicit family members, and professional enablers. Elena's investigation revealed that Michael's crimes had evolved over time. What started as relatively small-scale investment fraud had grown into a sophisticated operation that included money laundering, regulatory corruption, and systematic identity theft. She found evidence that Michael had been using her SEC credentials to gain advance warning of regulatory investigations. He'd been selling this information to other investment managers who were running their own fraudulent schemes. "Elena," Sarah said, after reviewing the latest evidence, "this isn't just about Michael's Ponzi scheme anymore. You've uncovered a network of financial crimes that could implicate dozens of people." Elena nodded grimly. "Which means dozens of people have motivation to ensure I don't survive to testify against them." As Elena's investigation deepened, she began receiving anonymous threats. Someone left dead flowers on her doorstep. Her home security system detected unauthorized attempts to access her property. Strange cars appeared in her neighborhood at unusual hours. "Michael's getting desperate," Agent Torres warned during one of their daily briefings. "Desperate people make dangerous decisions." Elena installed additional security measures and began varying her daily routines, but she refused to slow down her investigation. Every day brought new evidence of Michael's crimes, and Elena was methodically building the kind of comprehensive case that would ensure maximum federal prosecution. Elena's systematic approach was revealing the full scope of Michael's criminal enterprise. She'd identified 847 victims who'd lost approximately $400 million to various fraudulent investment schemes. She'd traced money flows through 17 different countries and 43 shell companies. She'd documented corruption involving federal regulators, state officials, and multiple financial institutions. But Elena's most important discovery was still to come. As she dug deeper into Michael's digital records, she found evidence of crimes that extended far beyond financial fraud. Michael's criminal organization had been willing to use violence and intimidation to protect their operation. Elena was about to discover that she wasn't just investigating financial crimes. She was exposing a criminal conspiracy that had already resulted in at least 3 suspicious deaths of potential witnesses. Elena's investigation took a darker turn when she discovered Michael's communications about problem clients. Investors who'd begun asking difficult questions about their returns or demanding detailed account statements. The first suspicious death was Harold Morrison, a retired pharmaceutical executive who'd invested $2.3 million with Chen & Associates. Morrison had been demanding a complete audit of his account when he died in what appeared to be a home invasion robbery. Nothing was stolen except his computer and investment files. Elena found email exchanges between Michael and James Patterson discussing the Morrison situation just days before the elderly man's death. "Harold's becoming a real problem," Michael had written. "He's threatening to contact the SEC directly. We need a permanent solution." Patterson's response was coded but clear. "Leave it to me. These things happen to elderly people all the time." Elena's blood ran cold as she read the correspondence. Morrison's death hadn't been a random crime. It had been murder designed to protect Michael's scheme. She researched 2 other suspicious deaths: Margaret Chen, no relation to Michael, a retired teacher who'd lost her pension savings, and Robert Taylor, a widower who'd discovered his late wife's investments were worthless. All 3 deaths shared disturbing similarities. All 3 victims had been demanding account audits or threatening regulatory complaints. All 3 had died in apparent accidents or crimes that eliminated their ability to expose the fraud. Elena realized she wasn't just investigating financial crimes. She was documenting a criminal conspiracy that included murder. She called Agent Torres immediately. "Marcus, I need to meet with homicide detectives from Greenwich PD and the Connecticut State Police. Michael's organization has been killing witnesses." Torres was quiet for a long moment. "Elena, that's a serious accusation. Are you certain?" "I have email evidence showing Michael and his co-conspirators discussing permanent solutions for problematic clients. 3 investors who were demanding audits died under suspicious circumstances within weeks of their complaints. Send me everything you have. I'm escalating this to the FBI's Organized Crime Task Force." Elena's investigation had evolved from financial fraud to racketeering and murder. She was no longer just trying to clear her name. She was building a case against a criminal organization that had killed to protect their operation. The realization that Michael was capable of murder changed Elena's entire approach to the investigation. She was no longer dealing with a white-collar criminal who'd gotten greedy. She was investigating a sociopath who'd been willing to kill elderly victims to protect his scheme. Elena's security concerns intensified when she discovered that her name appeared on Michael's problem list, along with the 3 deceased investors. "Elena is becoming a serious threat," Michael had written to Patterson just 2 days after her cancer diagnosis. "She has the expertise to unravel everything we've built. We need to consider extreme measures." Patterson's response was terrifying. Medical complications during cancer treatment. Very believable. Very tragic. Elena realized that Michael hadn't just planned to frame her for financial crimes. He'd been planning to kill her. Her cancer diagnosis had provided the perfect cover for murder that would appear to be natural causes. Elena immediately shared this discovery with Agent Torres and arranged for FBI protection. She also made arrangements with David Park to ensure that all evidence would be automatically transmitted to federal authorities if anything happened to her. "Elena," Sarah said during an emergency strategy session, "you need to consider witness protection. These people have already killed 3 times. They won't hesitate to kill again." Elena looked at the evidence spread across her dining room table. Hundreds of documents proving Michael's crimes, digital records of his communications, and now evidence of murder. She'd spent 2 weeks building the most comprehensive financial fraud case of her career. "I'm not running," Elena said firmly. "Michael made the mistake of thinking cancer would make me weak and compliant. He's about to learn that cancer just made me more determined to see justice served." Elena's investigation had revealed that Michael's criminal organization was much larger and more dangerous than anyone had realized. But Elena had something Michael didn't expect: the analytical skills to unravel his entire operation and the determination to see it through regardless of personal cost. The forensic accountant was about to become the key witness in a federal racketeering case that would dismantle one of the most sophisticated criminal organizations in Connecticut's history. Michael Chen had spent years positioning Elena as his fall guy. Instead, Elena Vasquez was about to become his destroyer. I returned home from the FBI briefing at 9:30 a.m. to find Jonathan in our kitchen drinking coffee and reading the Boston Globe business section with the casual confidence of someone whose world wasn't about to implode. He looked up when I entered, smiling with the warmth that had once made my heart race and now made my stomach turn. "Good morning, beautiful. You were up early." "Couldn't sleep," I replied, which was technically true. decided to go for a run around the common. Fixed everything all right? You seem tense. If only he knew. I was coordinating a federal investigation that would destroy his company, send him to prison for life, and expose crimes that had killed 17 innocent people. Tense didn't begin to cover it. Just thinking about year-end taxes. You know how I get about financial deadlines. Jonathan laughed, the sound carrying an edge of irony that only I could appreciate. My brilliant forensic accountant wife always worrying about numbers adding up correctly. The comment felt like prophecy. Numbers were indeed going to add up, and when they did, Jonathan would discover that marrying someone with my particular expertise had been the most catastrophic decision of his criminal career. My phone buzzed with a secure message from Agent Santos. Emergency development. Need you at field office immediately. Critical new evidence about co-conspirators. Jonathan, I need to run some errands this morning. Client meeting about a consulting project. Of course. I'll be in my office working on the presentation for next week's investor meeting. He had no idea there wouldn't be a next week's investor meeting. By Monday, Cross Medical would be under federal seizure, and Jonathan would be in a detention facility awaiting arraignment on murder charges. I drove back to the FBI field office with growing anxiety about what new evidence could have emerged overnight. The briefing room contained even more people than this morning, agents I didn't recognize, technical specialists, with laptops and a woman in an expensive suit who introduced herself as Assistant U.S. Attorney Rebecca Morrison. Mrs. Cross, Agent Santos began. We've had a significant breakthrough. Our technical team cracked the encryption on Cross Medical's corporate servers last night. What we found changes everything. She activated a large screen displaying email correspondence I'd never seen before. The sender was Jonathan. The recipient was listed as CIA International Partners. Mrs. Cross, your husband hasn't just been selling defective devices to American hospitals. He's been exporting the same dangerous equipment to developing countries where medical device oversight is minimal. The first email was dated March 2023. Regulatory challenges in domestic market creating inventory surplus. Can you facilitate distribution through alternative channels, price negotiable for bulk orders? The response came from someone identified as Viktor Petrov. Russia, Eastern Europe, South America markets very interested in cardiac devices. No FDA approval required. Can move 500 units immediately. I stared at the screen in horror as Agent Santos continued reading. Mrs. Cross, we estimate that Cross Medical has exported over 2,000 defective devices to countries with limited medical oversight. Patients in Russian hospitals, Brazilian clinics, and Eastern European medical facilities have been receiving equipment that Jonathan knew had a 40% failure rate. The scope of his crimes was beyond anything I'd imagined. Jonathan hadn't just been killing American patients, he'd been systematically murdering people across multiple continents. How many international deaths? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. We're still coordinating with international health organizations, but preliminary reports suggest at least 60 confirmed deaths from cross-medical device failures in foreign hospitals. 60 international deaths plus 17 domestic deaths. 77 people had died because my husband chose profit over patient safety, then expanded his killing spree globally when domestic oversight became inconvenient. Mrs. Cross? Asa Morrison continued. This international distribution adds racketeering charges under the RICO Act. We're now looking at a criminal enterprise that spans multiple countries and involves conspiracy to commit murder on an international scale. Agent Kim opened another file. The international conspiracy involves several people you know. Dr. Richardson has been certifying device safety for export while knowing about failure rates. Cross Medical's CFO Michael Torres has been managing financial transfers through Caribbean shell companies. Even Jonathan's mother, Catherine, has been involved. Catherine Howe. The Cross Family Foundation has been funding medical clinics in developing countries, specifically clinics that agree to use Cross medical devices exclusively. Charitable donations have been used to create markets for defective equipment. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Catherine Cross, the Boston socialite who'd welcomed me into her family, had been using charitable work to facilitate the international distribution of medical devices that killed patients. The family foundation that funded children's hospitals had been creating opportunities for children to die from defective equipment. Mrs. Cross, Agent Santos said gently. I know this is overwhelming, but there's something else. Our technical analysis of Jonathan's communications reveals that he's been planning to disappear. She displayed another email thread, this one between Jonathan and someone identified as Legal Solutions, LLC. Need comprehensive asset protection strategy. Potential regulatory challenges require offshore preparation. Timeline immediate. The response was chilling. Cayman Islands incorporation complete. Swiss accounts established. New identity documents in progress. Recommend liquidating domestic assets within 60 days. Mrs. Cross, your husband has been preparing to flee the country. He has offshore accounts, false identity documents, and liquidation plans for all domestic assets. If we hadn't moved quickly, you would have woken up one morning to find him gone with everything you owned. The timeline crystallized with sickening clarity. Jonathan's fake heart attack hadn't just been about delaying FDA oversight. It had been about buying time to prepare his escape from both criminal prosecution and our marriage. He'd been planning to abandon me while stealing everything we'd built together. How long has he been planning this? Based on email timestamps, escape preparation began 6 months ago, right around the time the first international death reports started reaching medical journals. 6 months ago, Jonathan had been talking about starting a family while secretly planning to disappear and leave me with nothing. 6 months ago, he'd been kissing me goodnight while coordinating with international criminals to distribute devices that would kill dozens of patients. Agent Santos pulled up financial records. Mrs. Cross, we've traced $12 million in cross-medical funds to offshore accounts your husband established without your knowledge. Under normal circumstances, you could lose everything when he fled, but your prenup protects you from asset flight related to criminal activity. What does that mean? It means that when we arrest Jonathan, we'll freeze his offshore accounts and domestic assets. The prenup ensures that legitimate marital property transfers to you while his criminal proceeds get seized for victim compensation. He planned to steal everything and leave you with nothing, but instead his conviction will make you wealthy while he spends life in prison. The irony was perfect. Jonathan's elaborate escape plan would fail completely, while the prenup he'd reluctantly signed would protect me from the financial devastation he'd intended to inflict. AUSA. Morrison consulted her notes. Mrs. Cross, we need to discuss timeline. Based on intercepted communications, Jonathan plans to liquidate domestic assets and disappear within 2 weeks. We have to move before he realizes we're investigating. What do you need from me? Complete cooperation with our technical surveillance help identifying additional evidence and, most importantly, maintaining normal behavior until we execute arrests. Agent Santos added, Mrs. Cross, I need to warn you that when this goes public, it's going to be the largest medical device fraud case in federal history. 77 deaths, international conspiracy racketeering charges, the media attention will be intense. Will I be safe? Federal witness protection if necessary, but your husband doesn't seem to view you as a threat. He's probably planning to disappear and leave you as collateral damage rather than eliminate you as a witness. How flattering. Jonathan planned to abandon me rather than kill me, which in his criminal world probably counted as consideration. As the briefing concluded, I realized that I'd underestimated both the scope of Jonathan's crimes and the protection my prenup provided. He wasn't just a fraudulent entrepreneur, he was an international criminal who'd murdered 77 people while planning to steal everything I owned and disappear. The expert team that Agent Santos had assembled represented the largest federal healthcare fraud investigation in history. Dr. Liu coordinated with international medical organizations to track device failures across multiple countries. FDA Inspector Williams worked with foreign regulatory agencies to document safety violations. SEC investigator Torres traced financial flows through Caribbean shell companies. Technical specialists analyzed encrypted communications that revealed the full scope of the conspiracy. But the most devastating addition to the team was Dr. Sarah Martinez, a cardiac surgeon from Johns Hopkins who'd been tracking cross-medical device failures independently. Mrs. Cross, Dr. Martinez explained during an afternoon briefing, I've been documenting cross-medical device problems for 18 months. The failure patterns are systematic, predictable, and completely preventable. She displayed medical charts that made my stomach turn. Cross-medical devices fail most frequently during emergency procedures when patients are most vulnerable. The engineering flaws your husband's team identified could have been fixed with minor design changes, but instead he chose to conceal problems and continue distribution. Why would he do that? Because redesigning devices would have delayed market launch by 6 months and cost approximately $3 million. Your husband chose to let patients die rather than spend money on safety improvements. The calculation was purely financial. Jonathan had conducted a cost-benefit analysis and determined that patient deaths were acceptable losses compared to reduced profits. 77 people had died because my husband valued $3 million more than human life. Dr. Martinez continued, "Mrs. Cross, I need you to understand something. Every cross-medical device currently implanted in patients represents a potential death sentence. We're coordinating emergency recalls with hospitals worldwide, but there are over 3,000 devices still in patients who don't know they're carrying equipment that could kill them at any moment. 3,000 people were walking around with Jonathan's defective devices in their chests, unaware that their life-saving equipment could become their murder weapon without warning. 3,000 families faced potential tragedy because my husband had chosen profit over patient safety. The afternoon brought news that transformed my understanding of the conspiracy's scope. Agent Kim pulled me aside with intelligence that had just arrived from the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. Mr. Cross, we've identified the source of Cross Medical's startup funding. Your husband's company was initially financed through money laundering operations connected to Russian organized crime. The revelation hit like ice water. Russian organized crime. Viktor Petrov, your husband's international distribution partner, is a known associate of the Solntsevskaya crime syndicate. Cross Medical was essentially a money laundering operation disguised as a medical device company. Are you saying Jonathan's been working with the Russian mafia? We're saying Jonathan's company was created to convert criminal proceeds into legitimate business revenue. The medical device fraud was secondary to the money laundering operation. The implications were staggering. I hadn't just married a healthcare fraudster, I'd married someone whose company was a front for international organized crime. Our beautiful Beacon Hill townhouse, our luxury cars, our comfortable lifestyle had all been funded through Russian money laundering disguised as medical device innovation. Mrs. Cross, Agent Kim continued, this adds international organized crime charges to Jonathan's case. We're not just dealing with healthcare fraud, we're dealing with someone whose crimes connect to global criminal enterprises. That evening, I sat in our home office, staring at financial records that told a story I'd been too trusting to recognize. Every investor meeting Jonathan had attended every business trip he'd taken. Every breakthrough he'd described had been part of an elaborate criminal conspiracy that used medical device fraud to launder money for Russian organized crime while murdering patients across multiple continents. My phone rang. Catherine Cross. Elena, darling, I hope you don't mind me calling, but I wanted to chat about Jonathan's business situation. The woman who'd welcomed me into her family, who'd paid for our wedding, who'd given us our beautiful home, was calling to discuss the criminal enterprise she'd been helping to operate. Of course, Catherine. What's on your mind? I've been hearing concerning rumors about regulatory challenges with Cross Medical. Nothing serious, I'm sure, but I wanted to make sure you and Jonathan are prepared for any complications. She knew. Catherine knew about the device failures, the international conspiracy, and quite possibly the planned escape. She was calling to gauge whether I'd discovered anything that could threaten the family's criminal enterprise. Jonathan handles all the business details, I replied carefully. I'm sure whatever challenges arise, he'll manage them appropriately. Of course he will. Jonathan's always been so capable. I just want to make sure you understand that sometimes business situations require flexibility. Family loyalty becomes very important during challenging times. The coded language was clear. Catherine was warning me to stay quiet about whatever I might have discovered and emphasizing that family loyalty meant protecting the criminal conspiracy, even if it meant covering up murder. I understand completely, Catherine. Family loyalty is very important to me. I'm so glad to hear that, dear. I knew you were the right woman for Jonathan from the moment I met you. Someone with your analytical skills, who understands the importance of discretion. She hung up, leaving me staring at my phone with the horrible realization that Catherine had always known about my forensic accounting background and viewed it as an asset for the family's criminal enterprise. She'd welcomed me into the family not despite my ability to detect fraud, but because of it. The Cross family had expected me to use my skills to help conceal their crimes, rather than expose them. Catherine's call was her attempt to remind me where my loyalty should lie, and warn me about the consequences of betraying family trust. Instead, her call had provided federal investigators with evidence that the conspiracy included Jonathan's mother and quite possibly other Cross family members. Every word had been recorded through the wire I'd agreed to wear, adding obstruction of justice and conspiracy charges to Catherine's growing legal problems. The next morning brought the revelation that would complete my understanding of Jonathan's betrayal. Agent Santos called at 6 a.m. with news that required immediate discussion. Mrs. Cross, we've received intelligence that Jonathan plans to liquidate assets and disappear this weekend. Our timeline has accelerated dramatically. This weekend? Financial transfers are scheduled for Friday. Flight reservations to non-extradition countries have been made for Saturday morning. If we don't arrest him by Thursday, he'll be gone forever. The timeline had collapsed from weeks to days. Jonathan was planning to rob me and disappear in 72 hours, leaving me with nothing while he spent stolen millions in countries that wouldn't extradite him for murder. Mrs. Cross, we need to execute arrests immediately. Today is Wednesday. We're coordinating raids for Thursday morning across multiple locations simultaneously. What do you need from me? Act normally until arrests begin. Once Jonathan is in custody, everything changes. You'll be under federal protection and your life as you know it will be over. I hung up and walked to our bedroom where Jonathan was getting dressed for another day of coordinating international murder while planning to abandon his wife and steal everything she owned. Good morning, he said, kissing my cheek with the casual affection of someone who had no idea his wife had become the key witness in the largest medical device fraud case in federal history. Good morning. Any interesting plans for today? Just routine meetings. Nothing too exciting. Routine meetings to finalize his escape plan and coordinate the liquidation of assets he intended to steal. Nothing too exciting except international conspiracy money laundering and preparation for flight from murder charges. I'll probably be home late, he added, some investor calls scheduled with overseas partners. Overseas partners who were Russian organized crime figures helping him prepare to disappear, while patients died from devices they both knew were defective. Of course, I'll probably have a quiet evening, maybe catch up on some reading. Reading federal case files about how my husband had murdered 77 people while planning to rob me blind before disappearing to avoid prosecution. As Jonathan left for his office, I realized that this was our last normal morning together. By tomorrow, he would be in federal custody facing life sentences for crimes that spanned multiple continents. By next week, I would own everything he'd tried to steal while receiving federal compensation for exposing his international criminal conspiracy. The expert team was assembled, the evidence was overwhelming, and the arrests were scheduled for tomorrow morning. Jonathan Cross would learn that marrying a forensic accountant with federal whistleblower protection was the most catastrophic mistake of his criminal career. But first, I would spend one final day maintaining the fiction of our marriage, while coordinating the complete destruction of everything he'd built through systematic fraud, international conspiracy, and the murder of innocent patients who'd trusted him with their lives. The big reveal was less than 24 hours away, and Jonathan had no idea that his wife had become the most dangerous person in his life. Thursday morning arrived with the crisp clarity of a Boston winter dawn and the weight of inevitability. At 5:47 a.m., I received the text I'd been expecting. Execute. All teams in position. Maintain normal routine until confirmation. Jonathan was still sleeping beside me, peaceful and unaware that federal agents were positioned around our neighborhood at Cross Medical's offices at Catherine's Lewisburg Square mansion, and at a dozen other locations connected to his international criminal conspiracy. In 3 hours, the man who'd spent years murdering patients while planning to rob his wife would wake up to the complete destruction of everything he'd built through fraud and deception. I dressed quietly in our bedroom, choosing the navy blue suit I'd worn to my first FBI briefing armor for the day that would transform me from victim to victor in the most devastating audit of my career. Jonathan stirred as I was putting on my watch. "You're up early again," he murmured, still half asleep. "Client emergency. Need to be in the office early to handle a crisis." Which was technically true. Jonathan was the client, this was definitely an emergency, and I needed to be in position to handle the crisis of his arrest and the complete collapse of his criminal enterprise. "Drive safely," he said, rolling over and returning to sleep. The last words my husband would speak to me as a free man were about driving safely. By the time I returned home, he would be in federal custody, and our marriage would be effectively over-terminated by crimes that had killed 77 people across multiple continents. I drove through the quiet streets of Beacon Hill toward the FBI field office, passing the elegant brownstones where Boston's elite lived, in comfortable ignorance of the federal operation unfolding around them. In a few hours, news trucks would line these historic streets as reporters covered the arrest of one of the city's most prominent entrepreneurs for international conspiracy and mass murder. The FBI command center buzzed with controlled energy as dozens of agents coordinated simultaneous raids across 3 states and 2 countries. Agent Santos briefed team leaders while technical specialists monitored communications and prosecutors prepared arrest warrants that would dismantle Jonathan's entire criminal network. Mrs. Cross, as Morrison approached with final instructions. Once arrests begin, everything becomes public. Are you prepared for media attention? As prepared as anyone can be for watching their husband arrested for mass murder. The prenup protects you legally and financially, but emotionally. There's no legal framework for processing that level of betrayal. She was right. Federal law could transfer Jonathan's assets to my name and compensate me for exposing his crimes, but no statute could undo the emotional devastation of discovering that the man I'd loved was an international criminal who'd planned to abandon me while stealing everything I owned. At 8:47 a.m., Agent Santos gave the signal. All teams execute arrests now. Across Boston, federal agents moved simultaneously. Jonathan's arrest at Cross Medical's offices, Catherine's arrest at her Beacon Hill mansion, Dr. Richardson's arrest at Mass General, CFO Michael Torres arrested at his Newton home, international arrests coordinated through Interpol. My phone rang at 9:15 a.m. Agent Kim's voice was calm but satisfied. Mrs. Cross. Jonathan Cross is in federal custody. Cross Medical's offices are being searched. Assets are being frozen. The operation is proceeding smoothly. I sat in the FBI command center watching live feeds of agents searching the company that had been built on international money laundering and medical device fraud. Jonathan appeared on one screen handcuffed and being read his rights in the Cambridge office where he'd spent years coordinating the murder of patients across multiple continents. He looked smaller, somehow diminished by the federal agents surrounding him and the weight of charges that would keep him in prison for the rest of his life. The confident entrepreneur who'd swept me off my feet at a medical conference was revealed as a frightened criminal whose elaborate plans had collapsed around evidence gathered by the wife he'd planned to abandon. Mrs. Cross, Agent Santos said quietly, it's over. Jonathan Cross will never hurt another patient, never steal another dollar, and never have the opportunity to abandon another spouse after robbing them blind. The relief was overwhelming, but it came mixed with a sadness I hadn't expected. The man being arrested wasn't just an international criminal, he was someone I'd loved, someone I'd planned to build a life with, someone whose betrayal had cut deeper than any fraud I'd investigated in my professional career. But that sadness was quickly replaced by satisfaction as reports came in about the scope of the arrests. 17 members of Jonathan's conspiracy were in custody. Over $50 million in assets had been frozen. International partners were being arrested in coordination with foreign law enforcement. The Cross Medical criminal enterprise had been completely dismantled in a single morning. At 11:30 a.m., my phone rang with a call from Sarah Chen, my attorney. Elena, I've been monitoring the situation. The prenup worked exactly as designed. Jonathan's arrest triggers all the asset protection clauses, and his conviction will transfer everything legitimate to your name while preserving your federal whistleblower compensation. How much are we talking about? The Beacon Hill House investment account's legitimate business interests, probably $3 million in clean assets, plus federal whistleblower compensation that could reach $15 million based on recovered funds. You're going from potential victim of financial abandonment to substantial wealth in a single day. The irony was perfect. Jonathan's plan to rob me and disappear had instead triggered legal mechanisms that would make me wealthy while he spent life in prison. His elaborate criminal conspiracy had been designed to enrich him at everyone else's expense, but the prenup he'd reluctantly signed had turned his own crimes into my financial protection. That afternoon, I returned to our Beacon Hill townhouse. My Beacon Hill townhouse now thanks to federal asset seizure laws and the prenup Jonathan had signed 7 years ago. The elegant federal-style architecture looked the same, but everything inside felt different, knowing that Jonathan would never return, and that every piece of legitimate property was now mine. I walked through rooms where we'd entertained friends, celebrated anniversaries, and planned a future that had never really existed. The dining room where I'd discovered his fraud. The kitchen where he'd described business success that was actually international conspiracy. The bedroom where he'd slept peacefully while planning to abandon me after stealing everything I owned. Federal agents had searched Jonathan's home office, seizing computers and documents that would provide additional evidence for his prosecution. The safe where he'd kept cash for his planned disappearance had been emptied, the money added to asset recovery funds that would compensate victims of his crimes. My phone buzzed with a news alert. Boston medical device CEO arrested in international conspiracy. The story was already breaking across multiple networks, describing the largest medical device fraud case in federal history. By evening, news trucks lined Beacon Street as reporters covered the arrest of Jonathan Cross and the dismantling of his criminal enterprise. I watched from behind closed curtains as my private life became public scandal, grateful for the federal protection that kept journalists from directly accessing me while the case proceeded. The pressure-building phase of Jonathan's reckoning had begun, and it would only intensify as prosecutors revealed the full scope of his crimes to a horrified public. 77 deaths, international conspiracy, money laundering, and planned abandonment of his wife. The story would dominate headlines for weeks while federal prosecutors built cases that would ensure he never had the opportunity to harm anyone again. I poured a glass of wine and sat in our living room, surrounded by the comfortable furnishings of a life that had been built on lies but would now be rebuilt on truth and justice. Tomorrow would bring victim impact statements, media interviews, and the beginning of a legal process that would provide accountability for crimes spanning multiple continents. But tonight I would rest in the knowledge that the audit of Jonathan Cross was complete. His victims would receive justice, and the man who'd planned to rob and abandon me would instead spend the rest of his life in federal prison while I inherited everything he'd tried to steal. The pressure was just beginning to build around Jonathan's crumbling world, but for me, the transformation from victim to victor was complete. Elena's investigation into the suspicious deaths led her down a rabbit hole that revealed the true scope of Michael's criminal enterprise. What she'd initially assumed was a relatively sophisticated Ponzi scheme was actually the financial arm of a much larger criminal organization. Working with Agent Torres and the FBI's Organized Crime Task Force, Elena discovered that Chen & Associates was laundering money from multiple criminal enterprises. Drug trafficking proceeds from New York. Human trafficking operations along the I-95 corridor. Even proceeds from illegal arms sales to international buyers. Elena, Agent Torres said during a secure briefing at the FBI's New Haven field office, "You've uncovered one of the largest money laundering operations we've seen on the East Coast." Michael wasn't just running a Ponzi scheme. He was providing financial services to organized crime. Elena reviewed the evidence with growing horror. Bank records showed massive cash deposits that had been converted into seemingly legitimate investment returns. Wire transfers from known criminal organizations had been processed through accounts bearing her forged signatures. "How long has this been going on?" Elena asked. "Based on your analysis, at least 6 years, possibly longer." Elena realized that her marriage to Michael hadn't just been a cover for investment fraud. It had been a cover for his role as a financial facilitator for multiple criminal organizations. Her credentials, her reputation, her access to federal databases had all been tools in Michael's criminal arsenal. The investigation revealed that Michael's organization had been using Elena's SEC access to identify potential targets for various crimes. Wealthy retirees who'd been flagged for investment fraud, government officials who might be susceptible to corruption, even potential witnesses in federal investigations who needed to be silenced. Elena found communications showing that Michael had been selling information from her SEC cases to criminal organizations, details about ongoing investigations, names of cooperating witnesses, intelligence about federal enforcement priorities. Elena Bulisa Chen said during a joint briefing with SEC enforcement, "Michael's been using your credentials to commit espionage against federal law enforcement. This is beyond financial fraud. This is a national security issue." Elena's personal violation deepened with each new revelation. Michael hadn't just stolen her identity for financial gain. He'd weaponized her entire professional career against the justice system she'd dedicated her life to serving. The investigation revealed that Michael's exit strategy had been in development for over 2 years. He'd been systematically moving money out of the United States, establishing new identities in non-extradition countries, and preparing to disappear permanently. Elena found detailed plans for Michael's escape, including forged passports, offshore bank accounts, and safe houses in 3 different countries. The timeline showed that Michael had planned to liquidate everything and disappear within 6 months of Elena's cancer diagnosis. "He was going to let me die in federal prison while he lived comfortably in Costa Rica," Elena told Sarah during one of their evening strategy sessions. "Elena, he was planning to kill you himself. The prison scenario was just his backup plan." Elena's investigation revealed that Michael's organization had been planning to eliminate her as soon as she became more liability than asset. They'd identified several methods that would appear to be cancer-related complications, including introducing toxins that would accelerate her illness or cause treatment failures. "We found communications with a corrupt oncology nurse," Agent Torres reported. "She was being paid to provide information about your treatment schedule and access to your medical care." Elena felt sick. Even her cancer treatment had been infiltrated by Michael's criminal organization. There was literally no aspect of her life that hadn't been contaminated by his crimes. But Elena's most disturbing discovery came when she analyzed the pattern of Michael's targeting. He hadn't chosen his elderly victims randomly. He'd been systematically targeting the families of law enforcement officials, federal prosecutors, and regulatory investigators. "It's insurance," Elena realized during a late-night analysis session. "Michael's been defrauding the families of people who might investigate him. If anyone gets too close, he has leverage." Elena found evidence that Michael had stolen retirement savings from the widow of a federal judge, the pension funds of 3 retired FBI agents, and the college savings accounts of multiple prosecutor families. "Elena," Agent Torres said grimly, "Michael's been building a web of corruption and leverage that extends throughout federal law enforcement. This investigation is going to expose compromised officials at every level." Elena's systematic analysis revealed that Michael's organization had corrupted at least 12 federal employees, including SEC investigators, FBI agents, and federal prosecutors. They'd been providing inside information about investigations, warning targets about impending arrests, and even sabotaging cases that threatened the organization. "The corruption goes all the way to the top," Elena told Sarah. "Michael's been paying federal officials to protect his operation for years." Elena realized that her investigation wasn't just exposing financial crimes, it was revealing systematic corruption within federal law enforcement. The implications were staggering. Elena, Lisa Chen warned, "Some of the people you're exposing have the power to make evidence disappear, witnesses relocate, and investigations terminate. You're not just fighting Michael anymore. You're fighting a corrupt system that has every motivation to silence you." Elena understood that her investigation had evolved beyond personal vindication. She was now the key witness in what would become one of the largest federal corruption cases in recent history. But Elena had advantages that Michael's organization didn't anticipate. Her reputation within federal law enforcement was impeccable. Her analytical work was regarded as the gold standard for financial forensics. And her systematic approach to evidence gathering had created a case so comprehensive that no amount of corruption could make it disappear. "Michael made one critical error," Elena told Agent Torres. "He assumed that I'd be too scared, too sick, or too overwhelmed to fight back effectively. He forgot that I've spent 15 years building cases against people exactly like him." Elena's investigation had revealed that she wasn't just married to a criminal. She'd been living with the financial architect of one of the most sophisticated criminal organizations on the East Coast. But Elena had systematically documented every aspect of their operation with the kind of forensic precision that would ensure maximum prosecutions and maximum sentences. Michael Chen had spent years building a criminal empire using Elena's identity and expertise. Elena Vasquez was about to use those same analytical skills to destroy everything he'd built. Elena's investigation had grown beyond what any single person could manage, even someone with her expertise. She needed a team of specialists who could help her navigate the complex intersection of financial crimes, organized crime, and federal corruption. Agent Torres arranged for Elena to work with a joint task force that included representatives from the FBI's Organized Crime Division, the SEC's Enforcement Branch, the IRS Criminal Investigation Unit, and the Connecticut State Police's Major Crimes Division. The team assembled in a secure conference room at the FBI's New Haven field office. Elena looked around the table at faces she recognized from years of federal law enforcement work. People whose careers had been built on dismantling exactly the kind of criminal organization Michael had created. "Ladies and gentlemen," Agent Torres began, "Elena Vasquez has uncovered what may be the most sophisticated financial crimes organization we've seen on the East Coast. Elena, please brief the team on your findings." Elena activated the presentation she'd spent 3 days preparing. The scope of evidence was overwhelming. Financial records, communication intercepts, digital forensics, and documented connections to multiple criminal enterprises. Chen & Associates has been operating as a financial services provider for organized crime, Elena began. They've laundered approximately $800 million over 6 years, provided financial intelligence to criminal organizations, and eliminated witnesses who threatened their operation. Special Agent Maria Santos from the FBI's Organized Crime Division leaned forward. "Elena, you mentioned eliminations. How many murders are we talking about?" "3 confirmed, possibly more. Harold Morrison, Margaret Chen, and Robert Taylor saw all elderly investors who were demanding account audits. All died under suspicious circumstances after threatening to contact federal authorities." IRS Criminal Investigations Supervisor James Wright reviewed Elena's financial analysis. "The money laundering operation is incredibly sophisticated. They've been converting criminal proceeds into apparently legitimate investment returns, then moving clean money through international banking networks." Elena nodded. "Michael's organization has been providing what amounts to a full-service criminal banking operation. Cash deposits, wire transfers, investment vehicles, offshore accounts, and even false documentation for tax purposes." Connecticut State Police Detective Lisa Rodriguez had been studying the murder evidence. "Elena, the pattern of these deaths suggests professional execution. This isn't just financial crime, this is organized crime with significant operational capabilities." Elena activated her next slide showing Michael's organizational chart. The leadership includes Michael Chen as the primary operator, James Patterson as the money laundering coordinator, and Angela Rodriguez as the regulatory intelligence source. But there are at least 20 other individuals involved in various capacities. SEC Enforcement Attorney Lisa Chen reviewed the regulatory violations. "Elena, the scope of securities fraud here is unprecedented. They've been operating unregistered investment vehicles, providing false information to regulatory authorities, and using insider information to manipulate markets." "The securities fraud is just one component," Elena replied. "They've been using my SEC credentials to gain access to federal databases, identify potential targets, and even sabotage ongoing investigations." Agent Santos looked up from her notes. "Elena, you mentioned federal corruption. How extensive is the compromise?" Elena felt the weight of what she was about to reveal. "I've identified at least 12 federal employees who've been providing information to Michael's organization. SEC investigators, FBI agents, federal prosecutors, and regulatory officials." The room went quiet. Federal corruption cases were always sensitive, but corruption at this scale would send shockwaves through multiple agencies. "Elena," Agent Torres said carefully, "these are serious accusations. Do you have documented evidence of the corruption?" Elena activated another slide showing intercepted communications. "I have emails, recorded phone conversations, and financial records showing payments to federal employees. Michael's organization has been paying for inside information, advance warning of investigations, and even case sabotage." Detective Rodriguez was taking detailed notes. "Elena, some of the people you're accusing have the power to terminate this investigation. How do we protect the evidence and ensure prosecutions proceed?" Elena had anticipated this concern. "David Park has created a distributed evidence storage system. All evidence is automatically backed up to secure servers that are controlled by people outside federal law enforcement. If anything happens to me or if the investigation is compromised, everything becomes public immediately." IRS Supervisor Wright smiled grimly. "Elena, you've essentially created a dead man's switch for one of the largest corruption cases in federal law enforcement history." "I've spent 15 years building cases against financial criminals," Elena replied. "I know how these people operate, and I know how they try to escape justice. This case is designed to be prosecution-proof." Agent Santos reviewed Elena's organizational analysis. Elena, what's your assessment of the organization's current status? Are they aware of your investigation? Michael knows I've discovered his financial crimes. He doesn't know the full extent of my investigation into the murders and corruption. He's currently accelerating his exit strategy, which gives us a limited window to complete evidence gathering before he disappears. Elena activated her final slide showing Michael's escape timeline. Based on his recent activities, I estimate we have approximately 2 weeks before Michael attempts to liquidate everything and leave the country. Agent Torres stood up. Elena, what do you need from this task force? Elena had prepared a detailed request list. I need surveillance on all key organization members' financial freezing orders for domestic accounts, coordination with international law enforcement to freeze offshore assets, and protection for potential witnesses who might cooperate. Elena, Lisa Chen asked, what about your personal safety? These people have already killed 3 times, and you're the biggest threat to their operation. Elena looked around the table at the law enforcement professionals who would help her bring Michael's organization to justice. I've been living with a sociopathic criminal for 8 years while fighting cancer. At this point, federal witness protection sounds like a vacation. The task force spent the next 4 hours developing operational plans. Elena would continue her analytical work under FBI protection, while coordinated law enforcement actions dismantled Michael's organization piece by piece. Elena, Agent Torres said as the meeting concluded, you've built the most comprehensive financial crimes case I've seen in 20 years. Michael's organization won't survive what you've uncovered. Elena gathered her evidence files, thinking about the 8 years of lies and manipulation that had brought her to this moment. Michael thought marrying a forensic accountant would provide him with perfect cover for his crimes. He never considered that the same analytical skills he was exploiting could be turned against him. As Elena left the FBI field office with her security detail, she realized that she'd assembled exactly the kind of law enforcement team necessary to dismantle Michael's criminal empire. The hunter had become the hunted, and Elena Vasquez never missed her target. Elena's systematic investigation had been proceeding flawlessly until she discovered evidence that shattered her remaining faith in the people closest to her. The betrayal came from a source she'd never suspected, her own sister Sarah. Elena found the evidence during a routine analysis of Michael's communication records. Hidden among hundreds of business-related emails was a thread that made her blood run cold. Michael had been corresponding with someone identified as SK, Sarah Kim. Elena stared at her computer screen, hoping she'd misinterpreted the evidence, but the pattern was unmistakable. Sarah had been providing Michael with detailed information about Elena's investigation from the very beginning. The email thread dated back to 3 days after Elena's cancer diagnosis, when she'd first contacted Sarah for legal advice. Elena's getting suspicious about the financial arrangements. Sarah had written to Michael. She's asking questions about power of attorney documents and SEC filings. I'm going to recommend she focus on her health and let you handle the financial stress. Michael's response was chilling. Perfect. Keep encouraging her to step back from work. The medical situation provides excellent cover for asset liquidation. Elena scrolled through weeks of communications, watching her sister systematically betray every confidence she'd shared. Sarah had reported Elena's discovery of the forged documents, her decision to investigate Chen and Associates, and even her plans to contact federal authorities. Elena's building a comprehensive case against you, Sarah had written just 2 days earlier. She's identified the money laundering operation and the suspicious client deaths. You need to accelerate your exit strategy immediately. Elena realized that Michael had known about every aspect of her investigation because Sarah had been feeding him intelligence. The criminal organization hadn't been reacting to Elena's discoveries. They'd been anticipating them. Elena's hands shook as she read Sarah's most recent communication. Elena's scheduled to meet with the FBI task force tomorrow. She's prepared evidence packages that will implicate dozens of people. If you're going to eliminate the problem permanently, this is your last opportunity. Elena felt physically sick. Her own sister was encouraging Michael to murder her. Elena scrolled back through the communications, trying to understand when Sarah's betrayal had begun. The earliest email in the thread was dated 18 months earlier, long before Elena's cancer diagnosis, long before she'd discovered Michael's crimes. "The Elena situation is becoming problematic," Michael had written. "She's getting too close to some of our client relationships. We need better intelligence about her SEC activities." Sarah's response revealed the depth of her betrayal. "I can monitor her personal communications and provide advance warning about any federal investigations that might affect your operations. But this arrangement needs to be more profitable for me." Elena found bank records showing payments from Michael to Sarah totaling over $300,000 during the past 18 months. Trapaillo hadn't just been betraying Elena's trust. She'd been profiting from it. Elena realized that Sarah's encouragement to investigate Michael's crimes had been a setup. Sarah had been guiding Elena toward discoveries that Michael's organization was prepared to handle while steering her away from evidence that might be truly damaging. Elena's most painful discovery came when she found communications showing that Sarah had helped plan the identity theft that had made Elena appear responsible for Michael's crimes. "Elena's reputation and credentials are our most valuable assets," Sarah had written. "If we can position her as the architect of the investment strategies, she becomes the perfect fall guy if anything goes wrong." Elena read through detailed discussions between Sarah and Michael about how to manipulate Elena's trust, exploit her illness, and ultimately eliminate her when she was no longer useful. "Elena's cancer diagnosis is perfect timing," Sarah had written. "If she dies during treatment, all the evidence points to her as the criminal mastermind who couldn't face justice. If she survives, she's too compromised by her illness to mount an effective defense." Elena realized that Sarah's legal advice had been designed to protect Michael rather than Elena. Every strategy Sarah had recommended, every precaution she'd suggested had been calculated to benefit Michael's organization. Elena felt a rage unlike anything she'd experienced during 15 years of investigating financial criminals. Michael's betrayal had been devastating, but she'd never truly trusted him with her emotional well-being. Sarah's betrayal cut much deeper. Elena had trusted her sister with her life, and Sarah had been actively trying to end it. Elena immediately called Agent Torres on his secure line. "Marcus, I need an emergency meeting. My sister has been working with Michael's organization from the beginning. She's been reporting every aspect of my investigation." "Elena, are you certain that's a serious accusation?" "I have 18 months of email communications between Sarah and Michael. She's been paid over $300,000 to spy on me and manipulate my investigation." Elena heard Torres typing rapidly. "Elena, where are you now?" "Home, but Marcus Sarah knows about tomorrow's task force meeting. Michael's organization has been anticipating our every move because Sarah's been feeding them intelligence." "Elena, you need to get to the FBI field office immediately. Don't tell anyone where you're going and don't communicate with Sarah again until we can assess the security breach." Elena hung up and looked around her home office, realizing that nothing in her life was what it had appeared to be. Her marriage had been a criminal enterprise. Her sister had been a paid informant. Even her cancer treatment had been infiltrated by people who wanted her dead. But Elena had built her career on adapting to new evidence and adjusting strategies based on evolving circumstances. Sarah's betrayal was devastating personally, but professionally, it was just another piece of evidence in the largest case of her career. Elena gathered her most critical evidence files and prepared to leave for FBI protection. She'd lost her husband and her sister, but she'd gained something more valuable: absolute clarity about who was trying to destroy her and why. Michael's organization had made a critical error by recruiting Sarah. They'd assumed that family loyalty would trump professional integrity. They'd forgotten that Elena Vasquez had built her career on following evidence wherever it led, regardless of personal cost. Elena was about to demonstrate that her commitment to justice was stronger than any family bond. Elena's emergency meeting with Agent Torres took place in a secure conference room at the FBI field office at 11:47 p.m. The late hour reflected the urgency of the situation. Sarah's betrayal had compromised every aspect of their investigation. "Elena," Torres said, reviewing the intercepted communications. "This changes everything. If Sarah's been reporting to Michael's organization for 18 months, they've been anticipating our investigation from the beginning." Elena activated her laptop and displayed the evidence she'd compiled. "Marcus, I think Sarah's betrayal might actually work in our favor." Torres looked skeptical. "Explain that." Michael's organization thinks they've been controlling our investigation through Sarah's intelligence. They've been reacting to what they think we know, rather than what we actually know. That means they've revealed more about their operation than they realize. Elena pulled up a comprehensive analysis she'd completed during her drive to the FBI office. Look at the pattern of their responses to Sarah's reports. Every time she told them about a discovery I'd made, they took specific actions to cover their tracks. Those actions reveal additional evidence of their crimes. Torres studied Elena's analysis with growing admiration. Elena, you've been using their own intelligence operation against them. I've been feeding Sarah specific pieces of information to see how Michael's organization would react. Their responses have revealed the full scope of their operation, including crimes I never would have discovered otherwise. Elena displayed a timeline showing how Michael's organization had responded to carefully crafted intelligence she'd provided through Sarah. When I told Sarah I discovered the money laundering operation, they immediately moved their $30 million to offshore accounts. When I mentioned investigating client deaths, they accelerated plans to eliminate 2 potential witnesses. Elena, you've been conducting a counterintelligence operation against your own sister. I've been conducting a forensic investigation that happens to include my sister as a subject. Sarah's betrayal is just another piece of evidence in the case. Torres reviewed Elena's evidence with the expression of someone witnessing a masterpiece of investigative work. Elena, you've turned their entire intelligence advantage into a liability. They've been exposing themselves by trying to stay ahead of your investigation. Elena felt a cold satisfaction as she contemplated the irony. Michael recruited Sarah to control and manipulate me. Instead, I've been using Sarah to control and manipulate his organization. Torres stood up and began making phone calls. Elena, we're accelerating the timeline. If Michael's organization is planning to eliminate witnesses and liquidate assets, we need to move immediately. Elena gathered her evidence files, thinking about the journey that had brought her to this moment. 8 years of marriage to a criminal, 18 months of betrayal by her sister, 2 weeks of systematic investigation that had exposed one of the largest criminal organizations on the East Coast. Marcus, Elena said, as Torres coordinated law enforcement responses. Michael made one critical error when he recruited Sarah. What's that? Elena smiled with the expression of someone who'd just checkmated an opponent in a game they didn't know they were playing. He forgot that I'm better at this than he is. Elena's counterintelligence operation reached its climax at 6 a.m. on a Thursday morning when coordinated law enforcement teams simultaneously executed search warrants at 17 locations across Connecticut and New York. Elena watched from the FBI's mobile command center as federal agents raided Chen and Associates Michael's home and the offices of every shell company in his criminal network. Michael's organization had been expecting Elena to meet with federal investigators. They hadn't been expecting Elena to orchestrate a coordinated takedown that would dismantle their entire operation in a single morning. Elena monitored radio communications as teams secured evidence from each location. The scope of documentation was staggering. Millions of financial records, thousands of client files, and digital evidence that would provide investigators with complete visibility into 6 years of criminal operations. Elena Agent Torres reported from the command center, "We've recovered over $200 million in domestic accounts and frozen another $400 million in offshore assets. Michael's organization won't be able to access their escape funds." Elena watched surveillance footage of Michael being arrested at his corporate housing. His expression shifted from confusion to panic to cold rage as federal agents explained the charges against him. Michael had spent years positioning Elena as the criminal mastermind of his organization. Now he was discovering that Elena had positioned him as the defendant in the most comprehensive financial crimes case in Connecticut history. Elena's systematic investigation had provided federal prosecutors with evidence supporting charges that would result in life sentences for multiple defendants: racketeering money, laundering, securities, fraud, murder, federal corruption, and conspiracy charges that would ensure Michael's organization never operated again. But Elena's personal satisfaction came from watching Sarah's arrest at her law office in Manhattan. Sarah had thought she was manipulating Elena's investigation to protect Michael's organization. Instead, she'd been providing Elena with intelligence that revealed the full scope of federal corruption within the criminal network. Elena, Lisa Chen reported from the SEC's Enforcement Division. Sarah's communications have given us evidence of corruption involving 12 federal employees. This is going to result in the largest federal corruption prosecution in recent history. But Elena realized that her investigation had accomplished something unprecedented. She'd turned her own betrayal into a weapon that would destroy everyone who'd tried to harm her. Elena's phone rang. Unknown number. Elena Vasquez. You think you've won? Michael's voice was cold, controlled, speaking from federal detention. I think I've exposed a criminal organization that's been operating for 6 years. Justice will determine who's won. Elena, you have no idea how deep this goes. The people I work with don't accept losses gracefully. Elena looked around the FBI command center at the dozens of federal agents who'd spent the morning dismantling Michael's criminal empire. Michael, the people you work with are either in federal custody or hiding in countries that will extradite them. Your organization is finished. My organization is finished, but Elena, there are other organizations that don't appreciate federal informants. You've made yourself a target for people who have resources I never had. Elena felt a chill despite the morning warmth. Michael was threatening her with criminal organizations beyond his own network. Michael, are you threatening a federal witness? I'm warning you that your investigation has consequences you haven't considered. Some problems can't be solved with forensic accounting. Elena hung up and immediately reported the threat to Agent Torres. Michael's organization had been dismantled, but Elena realized that her investigation had attracted attention from criminal networks that operated far beyond Connecticut's borders. Elena had spent 2 weeks exposing financial crimes that extended into organized crime, federal corruption, and international money laundering. She'd become the key witness in multiple federal prosecutions that would impact criminal organizations across the country. Elena looked at the evidence of her success: arrests, asset seizures, and federal charges that would ensure justice for hundreds of victims. But Michael's threat reminded her that some victories came with prices that extended far beyond the original conflict. Elena Vasquez had set out to clear her name and expose her husband's crimes. She'd succeeded beyond her wildest expectations. Now she was about to discover whether her analytical skills and federal protection would be sufficient to survive the consequences of her success. The forensic accountant had won the battle against Michael's organization, but the war for her survival was just beginning. The media frenzy intensified over the following days as details of Jonathan's international conspiracy leaked to the press. By Friday morning, our Beacon Hill Street had become a permanent camp for reporters, satellite trucks, and curious onlookers drawn by the spectacle of Boston's most prominent medical device entrepreneur being revealed as an international criminal. I watched from behind drawn curtains as CNN's Anderson Cooper broadcast live from directly in front of my house, describing the shocking betrayal that turned a forensic accountant into the key witness against her own husband's murder conspiracy. The irony wasn't lost on me that Cooper was standing on the sidewalk of a house that would soon belong entirely to me, thanks to the prenup Jonathan had reluctantly signed. My phone had been ringing constantly with interview requests, book deal offers, and documentary proposals. Everyone wanted the exclusive story of how I'd discovered my husband's crimes and brought down an international medical device conspiracy that had killed 77 people. I'd declined them all following DOJ guidance to avoid media contact until after Jonathan's trial. But the pressure wasn't just external. Agent Santos called Friday evening with disturbing news about Jonathan's behavior in federal detention. Mrs. Cross, I need to warn you that your husband has been making threats from jail. He's claiming you seduced him into criminal activity and that you were an active participant in the conspiracy. That's ridiculous. I have documentation proving I discovered his crimes independently. We know that, but Jonathan's legal team is apparently planning a defense strategy that paints you as the mastermind who manipulated him into committing crimes. It's desperate and won't work, but it shows he's willing to destroy you to save himself. The audacity was breathtaking. Jonathan was facing life sentences for crimes that had killed dozens of people, and his response was to blame his wife for corrupting him into international conspiracy and mass murder. The man who'd planned to rob and abandon me was now trying to frame me as the criminal mastermind behind his own elaborate fraud. Mrs. Cross, there's something else. We've intercepted communications suggesting that Jonathan's Russian partners are not pleased about his arrest. They view him as a security risk who could expose their money laundering operations. Are you saying I'm in danger? We're saying that international organized crime figures have reasons to want Jonathan silenced permanently, and they might view you as collateral damage. We're increasing your security protection immediately. The weekend brought a development that transformed my understanding of the conspiracy's scope. Dr. Liu called Saturday morning with news that had emerged from international medical database analysis. Mrs. Cross, we've been working with health organizations worldwide to track cross-medical device failures. The numbers are worse than we initially calculated. How much worse? We've identified confirmed deaths in 14 countries. The total fatality count from Jonathan's devices is now 112 people. 112 deaths. Jonathan's criminal conspiracy had murdered more people than most serial killers, but he'd done it through systematic fraud disguised as medical innovation. The scope of his crimes was beyond anything in federal healthcare fraud history. Mrs. Cross, there's something else. We've discovered that some of the international clinics using cross-medical devices were specifically targeting vulnerable populations, refugees, undocumented immigrants, patients without family, to advocate for them. The conspiracy wasn't just profiting from murder, it was systematically targeting the most defenseless victims. The calculation was purely evil. Jonathan and his international partners had identified patient populations least likely to have advocates investigating mysterious deaths, then deliberately marketed defective devices to clinics serving those communities. They'd weaponized medical inequality to maximize profits while minimizing oversight. Sunday brought a call from AUSA Morrison with news that would reshape the federal case entirely. Mrs. Cross, the grand jury, has returned expanded indictments. Jonathan is now facing RICO charges, international conspiracy charges, and 112 counts of second-degree murder. If convicted on all counts, he's looking at multiple life sentences without possibility of parole. What about the other conspirators? Catherine Cross is facing 25 years for money laundering and conspiracy. Dr. Richardson is facing 15 years for falsifying medical records. The international partners face extradition and life sentences. We're dismantling the entire network. The pressure on Jonathan was building to levels that made plea bargaining impossible. With 112 murder charges and evidence of international organized crime connections, federal prosecutors had no incentive to negotiate. They had overwhelming evidence, multiple cooperating witnesses, and public outrage demanding maximum penalties. That evening, I received an unexpected call from Catherine Cross, somehow calling from federal detention. "Elena, darling, I need to speak with you about family loyalty." The woman who'd welcomed me into her family from a jail cell, still trying to manipulate me into protecting the criminal enterprise that had murdered over 100 people. "Catherine, I think you should discuss family loyalty with your attorney." "Elena, you don't understand the forces you're dealing with. The Cross family has protected you for years, and now you're destroying everything we've built together." "Catherine, what you built together was a conspiracy that killed 112 innocent people. I'm not destroying anything, I'm ensuring that mass murderers face justice." The call was being recorded, of course, providing additional evidence of obstruction of justice and witness intimidation. Catherine was adding federal charges to her case while demonstrating the complete lack of remorse that characterized the entire conspiracy. "Elena, you need to understand that certain people are very unhappy about recent developments. People who don't appreciate attention from federal investigators. The threat was clear, but legally meaningless. Catherine was warning me about retaliation from Russian organized crime figures while providing prosecutors with recorded evidence of continued criminal activity from federal detention. Catherine, I understand completely, and I'm sure federal prosecutors will find your concerns very interesting." I hung up and immediately forwarded the recording to Agent Santos, adding witness intimidation charges to Catherine's growing legal problems while demonstrating that the Cross family viewed murder as acceptable business practice. The pressure building around Jonathan's case was becoming unsustainable, but instead of encouraging cooperation, it was revealing the true depth of the conspiracy's callousness. These weren't people who'd made mistakes. They were professional criminals who viewed patient deaths as acceptable costs of doing business. Monday morning brought the beginning of victim impact testimony that would transform public understanding of Jonathan's crimes from abstract fraud to personal tragedy. Federal prosecutors had organized a week of statements from families whose loved ones had died from cross-medical device failures, starting with Maria Santos, the first confirmed victim from September 2023. I sat in the federal courthouse gallery watching Maria's husband Carlos approach the witness stand with photographs of his wife and their 2 young children. Carlos was a construction worker whose English carried the accent of someone who'd learned the language as an adult, but his words carried the universal pain of someone who'd lost everything to preventable tragedy. Your Honor, my wife Maria was 34 years old when she received the Cross medical device during emergency heart surgery. The doctors said it would save her life. They said it was the most advanced cardiac equipment available. Carlos held up a photograph of Maria laughing with their children at a birthday party, the image of a young mother who'd trusted the medical system to protect her family. The device failed 3 weeks later during a routine checkup. Maria died on the operating table while our children waited in the hospital playroom for Mommy to come home. She never came home. The courtroom was silent except for Carlos's quiet sobbing as he described the aftermath of Maria's death. How he'd become a single father struggling to work construction while caring for 2 grieving children. How the family had been financially devastated by medical bills for treatment that had killed rather than cured. The doctors told us it was a rare complication that these things sometimes happen with cardiac surgery. Nobody told us that the device had a 40% failure rate. Nobody told us that the manufacturer knew it was dangerous. Federal prosecutor Jennifer Walsh approached the witness stand with medical records that told the story of systematic deception. Mr. Santos, did Cross Medical ever inform your family about known device problems? No. They sent us a brochure about how the CardioMax was the safest cardiac device ever created. They said we were lucky to have access to such advanced technology. The brochure was entered as evidence 4 pages of marketing materials claiming safety rates that Cross Medical knew were completely false. While Maria Santos was dying from device failure, Jonathan's company was distributing literature describing the same equipment as revolutionary breakthrough technology. Mr. Santos, what would you like this court to understand about the impact of your wife's death? Carlos looked directly at the defense table where Jonathan sat in his orange jumpsuit, finally making eye contact with one of his victims' families. I want him to understand that Maria wasn't a statistic or a complication. She was a mother who read bedtime stories and helped with homework and made pancakes on Sunday mornings. She was a person who trusted doctors to help her, and instead she was killed by equipment that was designed to fail. The testimony continued with David Chen, the retired teacher whose device had failed during a stress test in October 2023. His widow, Linda Chen, approached the stand with the dignity of someone who'd spent 40 years teaching children before becoming an unexpected widow at 65. David and I had plans for retirement. We were going to travel, spend time with grandchildren, enjoy the life we'd worked so hard to build together. The cardiac device was supposed to give us those years. Linda's voice remained steady as she described David's death, but her hands trembled as she held photographs of their life together. David was a careful man. He researched everything: cars, investments, medical procedures. He chose Cross Medical because they claimed their devices had the lowest failure rate in the industry. He trusted their safety data when he made the decision that killed him. The safety data was entered as evidence documents showing Cross Medical had deliberately falsified testing results to hide device problems while marketing to patients like David who prioritized safety over cost. Mrs. Chen, did your husband have any reason to believe the device was dangerous? None. Cross Medical's website showed 98% success rates. Their brochures quoted doctors praising device reliability. Everything suggested this was the safest choice available. Mrs. Chen, what happened to your family's financial situation after David's death? David was our primary income. I'm living on Social Security and the small teacher's pension, trying to afford the house we'd planned to enjoy together. The medical bills from his final hospitalization consumed most of our savings. The financial impact was devastating but typical. Cross Medical's fraud didn't just kill patients, it financially destroyed families who'd trusted their loved ones to medical devices that were designed to fail. The afternoon brought testimony from international victims connected via video link from hospitals and courtrooms around the world. Dr. Yuki Tanaka from Tokyo described how Cross Medical devices had failed in Japanese patients, leading to 18 deaths in cardiac units across Japan. Cross Medical marketing materials in Japanese claimed these devices were approved by American FDA and had perfect safety records. Our cardiac surgeons trusted American medical technology and recommended Cross Medical devices to our most vulnerable patients. The international testimony revealed how Jonathan's conspiracy had weaponized America's reputation for medical innovation to distribute deadly devices worldwide. Patients in Brazil, Eastern Europe, and Southeast Asia had died because they trusted that American medical device companies prioritized safety over profit. Dr. Alexander Petrov from Moscow, brother to Viktor Petrov, Jonathan's Russian business partner, provided testimony that exposed the international money laundering operation. My brother Victor told me that American medical device business was very profitable, that regulations were easy to avoid. He said American doctors were not careful about checking device safety, that money could solve any regulatory problems. The testimony revealed how Russian organized crime had viewed American healthcare as a profitable target for international fraud, with patients as acceptable casualties in money laundering operations disguised as medical device innovation. Tuesday brought the most devastating testimony of all parents whose children had died from cross-medical device failures. Jennifer Walsh approached these testimonies with special care, understanding that child victims would generate the emotional impact needed to ensure maximum sentences. Robert and Susan Martinez from Phoenix described their 8-year-old daughter Carmen, who'd received a cross-medical pediatric cardiac device during corrective surgery for a congenital heart defect. Carmen was born with a heart condition that required surgery when she was older. We waited years for her to be strong enough for the procedure. Cross Medical's pediatric devices were supposed to be specially designed for children. Susan Martinez spoke through tears as she described Carmen's final day. The device failed during a routine follow-up appointment. Carmen collapsed in the doctor's office while I was holding her hand. She was talking to me about her favorite cartoon, and then suddenly she couldn't breathe. The pediatric device failures revealed a particularly callous aspect of Jonathan's conspiracy. Cross Medical had marketed specialized equipment for children, knowing that pediatric patients had no ability to research device safety or advocate for alternative treatments. Mrs. Martinez, did Cross Medical ever inform you about device risks for pediatric patients? They told us children responded better to Cross Medical devices than adult equipment. They said Carmen would have a completely normal life after surgery. The marketing materials for pediatric devices were especially deceptive, featuring photographs of smiling children and testimonials from parents whose children had supposedly thrived with Cross Medical equipment. Mrs. Martinez, how has Carmen's death affected your family? We can't have more children. The trauma of losing Carmen has made it impossible to consider trying again. Our marriage has struggled under the weight of grief and the knowledge that her death was completely preventable. The psychological impact extended beyond immediate families to medical professionals who'd trusted cross-medical devices with their patients' lives. Dr. Sarah Kim from Children's Hospital of Philadelphia testified about the trauma experienced by medical staff who'd implanted devices that killed children. As pediatric cardiac surgeons, we carry the weight of every patient we lose. But losing children to devices we believed were safe has created lasting trauma for our entire medical team. Several nurses have left pediatric medicine because they can't trust medical devices anymore. The institutional impact was staggering. Cross Medical's fraud hadn't just killed patients, it had damaged trust in medical technology that would affect patient care for years. Wednesday's testimony focused on the international scope of Jonathan's conspiracy, with families from around the world describing how Cross Medical devices had murdered their loved ones while the company profited from their grief. Elena Kowalski from Warsaw described her father's death from device failure in a Polish cardiac unit. My father survived World War II communist occupation and decades of struggle to build a life for his family. He was killed by American medical equipment that was supposed to represent the best technology in the world. The international testimonies revealed how Jonathan's conspiracy had exploited global trust in American medical innovation to distribute deadly devices worldwide. Patients had died in hospitals from Tokyo to Sao Paulo because they believed American medical device companies prioritized safety over profit. By Thursday, the cumulative impact of victim testimony had created a courtroom atmosphere of barely contained rage. Jonathan sat at the defense table looking increasingly isolated as family after family described how his deliberate choices had destroyed their lives for profit. The final testimony came from Dr. James Liu, who'd first reported cross-medical device problems to federal authorities. As a cardiologist, I took an oath to do no harm. When I realized that cross-medical devices were systematically failing and killing patients, I had a professional obligation to report these problems. What I discovered was a criminal conspiracy that prioritized profit over patient safety on a scale I'd never imagined possible. Dr. Liu's testimony provided the medical expertise needed to understand the technical aspects of Jonathan's crimes. Cross-medical devices failed because of known engineering flaws that could have been corrected with minor design changes. The company chose to conceal these problems rather than invest in patient safety. Every death was preventable, and every death was the direct result of conscious corporate decisions. The victim testimony phase concluded with a moment of silence for the 112 confirmed victims of Jonathan's conspiracy. In the gallery, family members held photographs of loved ones whose trust in medical technology had been weaponized against them by criminals disguised as innovators. AUSA Morrison addressed the court with the cumulative impact of 4 days of victim testimony. Your Honor, this case represents the largest medical device fraud in federal history. 112 confirmed deaths, international conspiracy, systematic targeting of vulnerable populations. The scope of harm is unprecedented. These victims trusted medical professionals to protect them, and instead they were murdered by equipment designed to fail for profit. As I left the courthouse Thursday evening, I realized that the victim testimony had transformed Jonathan's crimes from abstract legal violations into personal tragedies that demanded maximum punishment. The pressure building around his case was no longer just legal, it was moral, emotional, and international in scope. Friday would bring the escalation to violence that nobody had anticipated, but everyone should have expected, when international organized crime figures decided that Jonathan Cross had become too dangerous to keep alive. Yes, sir. Friday morning began with news that transformed the case from complex fraud prosecution to imminent physical danger. Agent Santos called at 6:15 a.m. with intelligence that made my blood run cold. Mrs. Cross, we've intercepted communications indicating that Viktor Petrov's organization has ordered Jonathan's elimination. They view him as a security risk who could expose Russian money laundering operations to federal authorities. Ordered his elimination from federal prison. They have connections inside the prison system. Guards, inmates, contractors, organized crime figures can reach targets even in maximum security facilities. But Mrs. Cross, there's something else. The same communications suggest they want to eliminate all potential witnesses. The implications hit me like ice water. Jonathan's Russian partners weren't just planning to murder him, they were planning to kill everyone who could testify about their international conspiracy, including me. Mrs. Cross, we're placing you in protective custody immediately. Federal marshals are en route to your location. I looked around the Beacon Hill townhouse that had become my sanctuary after Jonathan's arrest, realizing that it was no longer safe. Russian organized crime figures who'd murdered patients across multiple continents wouldn't hesitate to eliminate the forensic accountant who'd exposed their money laundering operation. Within an hour, federal marshals had escorted me to a secure location outside Boston, while Agent Santos coordinated protection for other witnesses in the case. The safe house was a nondescript suburban home equipped with surveillance systems and armed guards, a stark contrast to the elegant federal-style architecture I'd been calling home. Mrs. Cross, U.S. Marshal Jennifer Rodriguez, explained, "We have credible intelligence that Viktor Petrov's organization has sent professional assassins to eliminate key witnesses in your husband's case. These are not local criminals, these are international killers with extensive experience in witness elimination." The escalation to violence felt surreal. 3 days ago, I'd been watching victim families testify about medical device failures. Now I was in federal protection from international assassins who viewed murder as routine business practice. My phone rang with a call from an unknown number. Agent Santos, monitoring communications from the FBI command center, nodded permission for me to answer. Elena Cross. The voice carried a thick Russian accent and the casual tone of someone discussing the weather. Who is this? Someone who thinks you have been making very poor decisions about family loyalty. Your husband's business arrangements require discretion. The threat was delivered with professional calm, like a customer service representative explaining policy changes. I think you have the wrong number. Mrs. Cross, I think you understand exactly why I am calling. Some situations can be resolved through reasonable conversation. Other situations require more direct solutions. Agent Santos was frantically coordinating a trace while the caller continued his polite death threat. Mrs. Cross, your husband created problems for serious people. Those problems can end with his cooperation, or they can end with more permanent solutions. The choice belongs to you. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you don't. But perhaps you would like to discuss this further in person. I am visiting Boston for business purposes. The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone while federal agents confirmed what I already knew: professional killers were in Boston specifically to eliminate witnesses in Jonathan's case. Mrs. Cross, Agent Santos said grimly, that call came from a burner phone registered to someone who entered the country yesterday on a diplomatic passport. Russian intelligence services are actively involved in witness elimination efforts. The stakes had escalated beyond anything in federal law enforcement experience. This wasn't just healthcare fraud or organized crime. It was international espionage involving foreign intelligence services, attempting to murder American citizens to protect money laundering operations. Saturday brought news that confirmed our worst fears. Dr. James Liu, the Mass General cardiologist who'd first reported cross-medical device problems, had been attacked in his hospital parking garage by two men with Eastern European accents. He'd survived only because hospital security had interrupted the assault. Mrs. Cross. Marshal Rodriguez reported, Dr. Liu is in stable condition, but the attack confirms that witness elimination is actively underway. These aren't empty threats. They're executing a systematic campaign to silence everyone who can testify against the conspiracy. And by Sunday, 3 other witnesses had reported suspicious encounters, intimidation attempts, break-ins, surveillance by unknown individuals with professional equipment. The Russian organization was systematically targeting anyone who could provide testimony about their money laundering operation disguised as medical device innovation. But the most shocking development came Sunday evening when Agent Santos called with news that changed everything. Mrs. Cross Jonathan has been attacked in federal prison. 2 inmates with connections to Russian organized crime attempted to poison him during dinner. Prison medical staff intervened, but barely. Is he alive? He's in critical condition in the prison hospital. Mrs. Cross, this changes our entire strategy. If Jonathan dies, we lose the key witness who can provide direct testimony about the international conspiracy. The irony was devastating. The man I'd helped send to federal prison was now a fellow target of the same criminals who'd helped him murder patients worldwide. Jonathan's Russian partners had decided he was too dangerous to keep alive, making him a victim of the same callousness he'd shown toward patients. Mrs. Cross federal prosecutors need to accelerate trial timeline immediately. Every day of delay increases the risk that key witnesses will be eliminated before they can testify. Monday brought an emergency court hearing to address witness protection and trial scheduling. AUSA Morrison argued for immediate proceedings while defense attorneys requested delays to address the security situation. Your Honor, the defendant's international co-conspirators are systematically attempting to murder witnesses to prevent testimony about their crimes. Justice requires proceeding immediately before more witnesses are eliminated. Judge Patricia Kellerman, brought in from another district specifically for this case, was clearly disturbed by the violence surrounding the prosecution. Counselors, this court will not allow international criminals to obstruct justice through witness intimidation and murder. Trial proceedings will be accelerated to ensure witness safety and preserve testimony. The decision meant that Jonathan's trial would begin within 2 weeks, compressed timeline designed to outpace Russian assassination efforts. Every witness would testify under federal protection, while foreign intelligence services attempted to murder them for exposing an international conspiracy. Tuesday brought the most frightening development yet. Catherine Cross Jonathan's mother had been found dead in her federal detention cell, apparently from a heart attack, but under circumstances that suggested poisoning. Mrs. Cross. Agent Santos delivered the news with grim professionalism. Catherine's death appears to be murder disguised as natural causes. The Russian organization is eliminating witnesses even inside federal facilities. Catherine's murder confirmed that no one connected to the case was safe from retaliation. The woman who'd welcomed me into her family, who'd paid for my wedding, who'd been part of the conspiracy that killed 112 patients, had been eliminated by the same international criminals she'd helped facilitate. Mrs. Cross Catherine's death means you're now the primary witness who can testify about the family's involvement in money laundering operations. That makes you the highest priority target for elimination. The escalation to violence had reached its peak. Russian intelligence services were murdering witnesses in federal custody to protect money laundering operations while I remained the key witness whose testimony could expose the entire international conspiracy. Wednesday brought a development that would reshape the entire case. Jonathan, recovering from his poisoning attempt in the prison hospital, requested an emergency meeting with federal prosecutors. Mrs. Cross, AUSA Morrison, called from the federal courthouse. Your husband wants to provide complete cooperation against his Russian partners in exchange for maximum witness protection. He's apparently realized that staying silent won't save him from assassination. Jonathan's decision to cooperate was motivated purely by self-preservation, but it would provide prosecutors with inside knowledge of the international conspiracy that had murdered over 100 patients while laundering money for Russian organized crime. What does his cooperation mean for the case? It means we can prosecute the entire international network rather than just the American conspirators. Jonathan's testimony combined with yours could dismantle Russian money laundering operations that extend far beyond medical device fraud. The violence had backfired spectacularly for Viktor Petrov's organization. Their attempts to eliminate witnesses had instead motivated Jonathan to provide complete cooperation against his international partners, ensuring that their money laundering operations would be exposed to federal prosecution. Thursday evening brought news that the assassination attempts had been traced to their source. FBI counterintelligence agents had arrested 3 Russian intelligence operatives attempting to poison Dr. Liu's water supply at Mass General. Mrs. Cross, Agent Santos reported with satisfaction, "We've broken the assassination network. The Russian operatives in custody are providing information about their orders to eliminate witnesses." Viktor Petrov's organization made a critical error. They sent intelligence agents who can be traced back to Russian government operations. The escalation to violence had exposed Russian government involvement in the conspiracy, transforming Jonathan's medical device fraud into an international incident involving foreign intelligence services attempting to murder American citizens. By Friday, the violence phase was concluded, but its impact had fundamentally changed the scope and stakes of the case. What had begun as healthcare fraud had become international espionage, with foreign governments attempting to murder American witnesses to protect money laundering operations disguised as medical innovation. The coordinated takedown was about to begin, and it would be far more extensive than anyone had initially imagined when I'd first discovered that invoice for a non-existent medical device. The coordinated takedown began at precisely 6:30 a.m. on Monday, December 16, 2024, with simultaneous operations across 12 countries designed to dismantle the entire international conspiracy that Jonathan had built around medical device fraud and Russian money laundering. I watched from the FBI command center as Agent Santos coordinated with international law enforcement agencies in what she described as the largest coordinated healthcare fraud takedown in federal history. Wall-mounted screens displayed real-time feeds from operations in Moscow, São Paulo, Tokyo, Warsaw, and 8 other cities where cross-medical devices had killed patients while laundering money for international criminal organizations. Mrs. Cross. AUSA Morrison explained as agents prepared final arrest warrants. Your evidence started this investigation, but it's grown into something that will reshape international medical device regulation and expose money laundering networks that operate across multiple continents. The scope was staggering. What had begun with my discovery of a fake medical invoice had evolved into a federal prosecution involving 347 defendants across 14 countries, with charges ranging from healthcare fraud to international conspiracy to attempted murder of federal witnesses. In Moscow, Russian Federal Security Service agents arrested Viktor Petrov and 12 associates involved in money laundering operations disguised as medical device distribution. The arrests were coordinated with American intelligence agencies as part of a broader investigation into Russian organized crime operations targeting American healthcare systems. Viktor Petrov has been a target of international law enforcement for over a decade. Agent Kim reported from his liaison position with Interpol. Your husband's conspiracy gave us the evidence needed to finally prosecute money laundering operations that extend far beyond medical devices. In São Paulo, Brazilian authorities raided clinics that had been using cross-medical devices exclusively on undocumented immigrants and refugees, vulnerable populations specifically targeted because their deaths were less likely to trigger government investigations. The Brazilian operation reveals the systematic nature of victim targeting. Dr. Liu reported via secure video link from Mass General. Cross-medical devices were specifically marketed to clinics serving populations with limited legal protections or family advocacy. The targeting of vulnerable populations had been a deliberate strategy designed to minimize oversight while maximizing profits from equipment that was known to kill patients at unacceptable rates. In Tokyo, Japanese authorities arrested medical device distributors who had been falsifying FDA approval documents to convince Japanese hospitals that cross-medical equipment met American safety standards. The international fraud required extensive document forgery and bribery of foreign medical officials, FDA Inspector Williams reported. Cross-medical's conspiracy involved corrupting medical device oversight in multiple countries to distribute equipment that would never have been approved through legitimate channels. The morning raids produced evidence that revealed the true scope of Jonathan's international criminal enterprise. Over $200 million in fraudulent transactions, 47 false medical device approvals, and systematic corruption of medical device oversight in 12 countries. But perhaps the most significant arrest occurred in the Cayman Islands, where financial investigators seized the offshore accounts Jonathan had established for his planned escape. The accounts contained over $47 million in laundered proceeds from medical device fraud money that would now be used to compensate victims' families and fund international medical device safety reforms. Westi Mehisaki Mae across CEC investigator Torres announced with obvious satisfaction, "Your prenup's asset protection clauses and federal whistleblower compensation combined with seized criminal proceeds make you one of the wealthiest women in Massachusetts. Jonathan's plan to rob and abandon you has instead made you extremely wealthy while he faces life in prison." The financial irony was perfect. Jonathan's elaborate scheme to steal everything I owned had instead triggered legal mechanisms that would transfer millions of dollars to my name while he spent the rest of his life in federal custody. By noon, the international arrests had netted 89 defendants directly connected to Cross-Medical's conspiracy, with more arrests expected as authorities analyzed seized evidence. The coordinated takedown had effectively dismantled an international criminal network that had been operating for over 4 years. Mrs. Cross, Agent Santos reported during the afternoon briefing, "We've confirmed arrests of every major figure in your husband's conspiracy. The medical professionals who falsified safety reports, the financial operatives who managed money laundering, the international distributors who targeted vulnerable populations, the entire network is in custody." But the most satisfying arrest was Dr. Richardson, the cardiologist who had participated in Jonathan's fake heart attack, while knowing that real patients were dying from cross-medical device failures. He'd been arrested at Mass General while treating patients with the same casual indifference he'd shown when helping to conceal murders disguised as medical complications. Dr. Richardson's arrest has particularly strong symbolic value, Dr. Liu observed. He violated every principle of medical ethics to help conceal systematic patient murder while continuing to practice medicine. His prosecution will send a clear message that medical professionals who participate in healthcare fraud face the same consequences as the criminals they enable. The afternoon brought news of international cooperation that exceeded even federal prosecutors' expectations. European Union authorities announced that cross-medical device seizures had revealed evidence of medical device fraud networks throughout Eastern Europe, leading to arrests of 67 additional defendants in Poland, Czech Republic, and Hungary. The international cooperation has been extraordinary, Agent Kim reported from his coordination center. Jonathan's conspiracy has provided law enforcement with evidence needed to prosecute medical device fraud networks that have been operating across Europe for years. Tuesday morning brought the trial phase that would conclude the coordinated takedown. Judge Kellerman had scheduled accelerated proceedings designed to complete prosecution before any remaining international conspirators could eliminate additional witnesses. Jonathan appeared in federal court wearing an orange jumpsuit and the hollow expression of someone who'd finally understood the scope of his destruction. The confident entrepreneur who'd swept me off my feet at a medical conference looked like what he'd always been underneath the facade, a frightened criminal whose elaborate plans had collapsed around evidence gathered by the wife he'd planned to abandon. Mrs. Cross. Asa Morrison approached the witness stand with the comprehensive evidence file that would conclude my testimony. Please tell this court about your discovery of the defendant's systematic healthcare fraud and international conspiracy. For 6 hours, I walked the court through every piece of evidence I'd gathered, every federal agency I'd contacted, every victim family I'd helped identify. The testimony connected Jonathan's fake heart attack to the international money laundering operation that had killed 112 patients across multiple continents. But the most powerful moment came when I described the morning I discovered the fake medical invoice that started everything. Your Honor, I found an invoice for a medical device that didn't exist for a surgery that never happened for a heart attack that was completely fabricated. My husband had built his entire criminal conspiracy around lies so elaborate that he'd convinced himself they were real. Jonathan's defense attorney attempted to portray him as a naive entrepreneur manipulated by sophisticated international criminals, but the evidence was overwhelming. Financial records showed he'd been the central coordinator of every aspect of the conspiracy, from device design to international distribution to money laundering operations. The prosecution's closing argument summarized 4 months of investigation and international cooperation. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Jonathan Cross built a criminal enterprise that systematically murdered patients for profit while laundering money for international organized crime. 112. Confirmed deaths, $200 million in fraudulent transactions. Corruption of medical device oversight in 12 countries. This defendant created a conspiracy of unprecedented scope and callousness. But perhaps most significantly, when federal authorities began investigating his crimes, Jonathan Cross planned to abandon his wife after stealing everything she owned and disappearing to a non-extradition country. Instead, his wife's forensic accounting expertise and legal protections have ensured that justice was served while protecting the victims he tried to silence. The jury deliberated for 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all 347 federal charges: racketeering, international conspiracy, healthcare fraud, money laundering, witness intimidation, and 112 counts of second-degree murder. Judge Kellerman's sentencing was swift and comprehensive. Mr. Cross, this court has never encountered a criminal conspiracy of this scope and callousness. You systematically murdered patients across multiple continents while corrupting international medical device oversight for personal profit. You plan to abandon your wife after stealing her assets to fund your escape from accountability. This court sentences you to life imprisonment without possibility of parole on each murder charge to be served consecutively. Total sentence 112 consecutive life terms plus 247 years for additional federal charges. The mathematical impossibility of Jonathan's sentence reflected the court's determination that he would never have another opportunity to harm patients or betray family members who trusted him. The coordinated takedown concluded with international asset seizures that recovered over $340 million in criminal proceeds for victim compensation and medical device safety reforms. Every family that had lost loved ones to cross-medical device failures received substantial compensation, while survivors with implanted devices received emergency medical care and device replacement. But perhaps the most significant outcome was the international medical device safety reform that emerged from the prosecution. The Cross medical case had exposed systematic weaknesses in international medical device oversight, leading to new treaties requiring coordinated safety monitoring and information sharing between countries. Mrs. Cross, Agent Santos said, as we watched news coverage of Jonathan being transported to Federal Supermax facility, your investigation has created the most comprehensive medical device safety reform in international history. No criminal will ever again be able to exploit jurisdictional gaps to distribute deadly medical equipment. Wednesday afternoon brought the final resolution that completed my transformation from victim to victor in the most devastating audit of my career. Tut. Judge Kellerman's gavel fell with the finality that marked the end of the most complex federal prosecution in healthcare fraud history. As Jonathan was led away in shackles to begin serving 112 consecutive life sentences, I felt a mixture of emotions that I'd never experienced during any audit in my professional career. Justice had been served completely. Jonathan Cross would spend the rest of his life in Federal Supermax prison, knowing that his elaborate criminal conspiracy had been exposed by the wife he'd planned to rob and abandon. The international network of criminals he'd worked with faced similar life sentences across multiple countries. Every victim family had received substantial compensation from seized criminal assets. But more than justice, there was transformation. The frightened woman who'd discovered a fake medical invoice 8 months ago had become the key witness in an international prosecution that reshaped medical device regulation worldwide. The wife who'd been planned for abandonment had instead inherited millions of dollars through legal mechanisms her husband had unknowingly created. Mrs. Cross, AUSA Morrison said as we walked from the federal courthouse for the final time, Your cooperation has resulted in the largest victim compensation fund in healthcare fraud history, the most comprehensive international medical device safety reform ever implemented, and the complete dismantling of criminal networks that operated across multiple continents. The numbers were staggering. $340 million in seized criminal assets distributed to 847 victim families. New international treaties requiring coordinated medical device oversight. Mandatory reporting systems that would prevent future conspiracies from exploiting regulatory gaps. Enhanced whistleblower protections for healthcare professionals who reported suspected fraud. But stay, Mrs. Cross. There's one more thing. The federal whistleblower compensation for your role in exposing this conspiracy has been calculated at $34 million, 10% of total recovered criminal proceeds. Combined with the Beacon Hill Townhouse legitimate investment accounts and other assets transferred through the prenup, Jonathan's conviction had made me one of the wealthiest women in New England. The man who'd planned to leave me with nothing had instead ensured that I'd never need to work again unless I chose to. But wealth was secondary to the knowledge that 112 families had received justice and that future patients would be protected by reforms created from Jonathan's prosecution. Thursday morning brought a call from Dr. Liu at Mass General with news that completed the medical transformation sparked by the case. Elena, I wanted you to know that the Cross medical case has revolutionized how we approach medical device safety. Every cardiac device now undergoes international safety verification before approval. Patient advocacy groups review all testing data. Mandatory reporting systems ensure that device problems are immediately shared between countries. What about the patients who still have Cross medical devices implanted? Emergency replacement surgery has been completed for all 247 patients worldwide who received Cross medical devices. Every person is now protected by equipment that meets the highest international safety standards. The medical victory was complete. Not only had Jonathan's conspiracy been prosecuted, but every person endangered by his devices had been protected through international cooperation sparked by the investigation. Friday brought a call from Agent Santos with the final update on international prosecutions. Elena, I wanted to give you closure on the international aspects of the case. Viktor Petrov and his associates have been sentenced to life imprisonment in Russian federal facilities. Brazilian authorities have convicted 23 defendants connected to refugee targeting. Japanese prosecutors have secured convictions for all medical device fraud charges. What about the Russian intelligence operatives who tried to murder witnesses? Diplomatic expulsion and international sanctions. The Cross medical case has become a symbol of how international law enforcement can cooperate to protect victims and prosecute criminals regardless of their government connections. The international justice was as complete as domestic prosecution. Every person who'd participated in Jonathan's conspiracy faced maximum penalties under their respective national laws. Saturday morning, I stood in the kitchen of my Beacon Hill townhouse, my house now thanks to the prenup Jonathan had reluctantly signed 7 years ago, reading newspaper coverage that described the case as the most comprehensive international healthcare fraud prosecution in history. The Boston Globe's headline read, "Local accountant's investigation saves thousands of lives worldwide." The story described how my forensic accounting skills had exposed a conspiracy that would have continued killing patients indefinitely if not for the investigation sparked by one fake medical invoice. But the most meaningful coverage came from international medical journals that analyzed the systematic reforms created by Jonathan's prosecution. The Cross medical case had become a textbook example of how individual courage could expose institutional failures and create lasting change that protected vulnerable populations worldwide. Sunday afternoon, I received an unexpected call from Maria Santos's husband, Carlos, the construction worker, whose wife had been killed by Jonathan's first device failure. "Betsy, Mrs. Cross, I wanted to thank you for what you did for our family. The compensation fund has allowed me to stop working construction and go back to school. I'm studying to become a patient advocate to help other families navigate medical decisions. Carlos, your wife's testimony was crucial to ensuring Jonathan faced appropriate consequences. Maria's story helped the court understand the human cost of his crimes. Mrs. Cross Maria would be proud that her death helped protect other patients. She always said that if something bad happened to her, she hoped some good would come from it." The call reminded me that the transformation wasn't just personal, it was generational. Carlos Santos was becoming a patient advocate because his wife's death had sparked reforms that would protect future patients. The cross-medical case was creating a legacy of protection that would extend far beyond the immediate prosecutions. As Sunday evening approached, I realized that my transformation was complete but ongoing. The forensic accountant who'd discovered healthcare fraud had become an advocate for patient safety and international cooperation. The wife who'd been planned for abandonment had become a symbol of how legal preparation and professional expertise could protect against even the most elaborate betrayals. The money Jonathan's conviction had transferred to me would fund patient advocacy organizations, medical device safety research, and educational programs that taught forensic accounting skills to healthcare professionals. His plan to steal everything I owned had instead created resources that would protect patients for generations. Monday morning brought the beginning of my new life as someone who'd audited her own marriage and emerged victorious from the most devastating investigation of her career. The house that had once represented Jonathan's success now symbolized justice served and transformation completed. I walked through the elegant rooms where we'd entertained friends who'd never suspected they were socializing with an international criminal. The dining room where I'd discovered his fraud. The kitchen where he'd described business success that was actually systematic murder. The office where he'd planned to abandon me while stealing everything I owned. Every room now told a different story. The story of how individual courage and professional expertise could expose institutional corruption, protect vulnerable populations, and create lasting reform that transcended personal justice. The grandfather clock in our front hallway chimed 9 times, marking the beginning of a day when I would no longer be Elena Cross, wife of a convicted murderer, but Elena Martinez. I'd returned to my maiden name, patient advocate, forensic accounting consultant, and living symbol of how the right legal protections could transform victims into victors. The transformation was complete. Jonathan Cross would spend eternity in federal prison while the wife he'd planned to abandon used his seized criminal proceeds to protect the patients he'd tried to murder. Some audits end with financial restatements. Others end with criminal prosecutions. But the best audits, the ones that matter most, end with transformation that protects innocent people from ever experiencing the harm that sparked the investigation. The audit of Jonathan Cross had protected patients worldwide, created international safety reforms, and demonstrated that no criminal conspiracy is sophisticated enough to survive exposure by someone with the right expertise, legal protection, and moral determination to see justice served. The reckoning was complete, but the protection it created would last forever. From one fake medical invoice to 112 consecutive life sentences, Jonathan Cross learned that lying to his forensic accountant wife about committing international healthcare fraud was the worst decision of his criminal career. Elena didn't just expose his crimes. The prenup he'd reluctantly signed 7 years earlier became the legal weapon that transferred millions to her name while he got life in prison. But what shocked me most, Jonathan had been planning to abandon Elena and steal everything. But instead, his conviction made her one of the wealthiest women in Boston. Sometimes the perfect crime meets the perfect investigator. Which part got you the fake heart attack, the Russian mafia connections, or the prenup that backfired spectacularly? Drop your thoughts below.